Hey guys. Tonight we leave the city's corners behind and step into a round little world on the open steppe, where your breath appears before you and the horizon forgets to end. You're waking inside a felt house, a gare, while horses nickering outside do a better job than any alarm. This will be gentle, unhurried, a tour of morning rituals neat enough to make your eyelids heavy. One honest reality check, though. You probably wouldn't last a week on this pace or this menu. And that's fine tonight. It's for comfort, not conquest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our little night map unroll across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We head outside quietly now. You wake to a felted dusk that makes shadows seem polite. The wooden lattice khana draws diamonds around the walls, and a pale circle of sky peers through the toono, the crown at the roof's center. Your blanket smells of lanolin and yesterday's ride. Rugs underfoot have memorized your footsteps, and the air says, not yet, but soon. You stretch slowly. Fast moves in cold air are for heroes and midges. The room is round, kindly. There are no corners for worries to hide in. You keep your feet respectful of the hearth, even with embers sleeping. The fire is the room's elder, and elders get courtesy. Mainstream fact to pocket. Most gers traditionally face south, a practical orientation that welcomes sunlight and dodges the severest northern winds. You feel that decision now as the door's seam grows pale with the approach of day. Your stomach clears its throat politely. Breakfast is coming, but first you audit how the night treated you. Fingers flex, toes report, knees submit a memo about yesterday's miles. You stamp it received and file it for later. Outside, a low chorus begins. Horses scraping frost from grass, a dog snorting dream dust, and a crane announcing opening hours for the sky. Your hand glides over a bouquet sleeping beside the rug. That is for later. Not a hunger solved now. The felt wall carries a narrow draft, and your ears read it like a note slid under the door. East wind, slow bring patience. You stand, careful not to step on the threshold, another custom that feels like common sense once you live with it. The doorway of a home is a face. You don't tread on a face. Quirky, perhaps, but it organizes the day's manners. You shrug into your deal, the long robe that remembers your shape better than you do. The sash cinches your center and gifts you pockets deep enough to smuggle a bakery. Don't try. There is no bakery. You duck your head and slip outside. The air greets you with a simple miracle cold that wakes without scolding. You greet the morning like a coworker who doesn't gossip. Nod, breathe, proceed. Grass brushes your boots, and the sky turns from wool to porcelain. The horses, tethered in a soft angle of pasture, lift their heads. One blows a curious cloud toward you, as if returning a favor from some other dawn. Hunger walks with you at conversational distance. Not a shout, just a tap on the shoulder that says, "We'll talk." You let the thought of warm, salty comfort drift across your mind like steam across a cup, but you make no move toward kettles or pots. That choreography belongs to later. For now, you inventory the day. How many clouds, how many birds, how much wind. Enough of each, not too much of any. A steady truth calms you. Mobility is the empire's breakfast. Riders often keep multiple horses, rotating them to spare legs and store energy. That is how the steppe stretches an army's reach like taffy. You nod toward the herd as if nodding toward a pantry of endurance. Somewhere inside, a modern clock wonders where the espresso machine hides. You reassure it with a shrug. Here, the nearest cafe is spelled cream, and it comes from an animal that would outrun your best ideas. You ease back inside, careful with the threshold, and settle by the hearth without feeding it, just keeping it company with your breathing. On the wall hangs a bag of dried curds, white as old bones and twice as stubborn. They are patient food, reminding you that softness is earned with water and time. The wind keeps a rumor. Milk and morning are related not just in language, but in attitude. Gentle, necessary, slightly bossy. Historians still argue whether those famous tales of riders sipping horse blood on the move describe a regular habit or a rare emergency fix. Either way, this dawn is not a crisis, and your appetite prefers kindness over drama. The rule you adopt is simple. Before the saddle, something warm. Before the gallop, something calm. You breathe that sentence like steam. Family by blood, by camp, by season stirs. You share a glance that means, later we'll laugh at nothing, and another that means, check the foal's tether, and a third that simply means, good. Words are saved for when they'll do actual work. You set your gloves by the door to think about warming themselves. They never do. And roll your shoulders until joints remember their jobs. A soft clink of metal fades back into quiet. One last, gentle joke before real warmth begins. Your modern brain proposes cereal. The steppe replies, we have wolves with schedules, try again. You accept the ruling. The morning's contract is generous. Move slowly, notice kindly, and save your strength for the part of the day that will ask you to be an arrow. You exhale, tasting smoke and wool and wind, and let hunger stand beside you like a quiet friend who knows not to speak yet. Softly. You crouch by the hearth like someone checking on a sleeping cat, respectful and faintly amused by how much personality a fist of coals can keep overnight. Last night's fire is still alive, shy about it, glowing bruise red beneath a quilt of ash. With 2 fingers you rake a small hollow, feel the nearness of heat with your knuckles, and gather the embers into a tighter huddle. Your breath becomes bellows, slow and steady, a lullaby pretending to be work. A ribbon of smoke tests the toono, the round crown of the roof, and the room answers with a quiet, agreeable sigh. You feed the coals the gentlest breakfast, a twist of dry grass from the wall bundle, a flat coin of dung, a splinter saved from yesterday's cart repair. The smell is honest, smoky, and faintly sweet, like summer hay translated into winter grammar. Mainstream fact to keep handy. On the open steppe, wood is scarce, so argal, the carefully dried dung of horses, cattle, or sheep, is the everyday fuel. It burns hot and steady with minimal sparks and a tidy ash that behaves itself. The ember brightens into flame without theatrics, which is the preferred style of a morning that plans to last. You bring out the kettle before you even glance at food. Water first? Always. The iron pot is a squat veteran with a rounded belly, a kazan that has witnessed storms, weddings, and the inside jokes of 1,000 breakfasts. Its handle squeaks like an old friend clearing their throat. You settle a 3-legged stand over the hearth iron, imitating a tiny herd, and seat the pot so it doesn't wobble. Historians still argue whether cast iron cookware like this was already common among 13th century riders or became widespread later through trade routes and blacksmith migrations. Either way, by dawn today it is simply the boss. The bucket by the door remembers last night's walk to the stream. A paper-thin lid of ice skims the top. You tap it with a spoon's back and it cracks like sugar glaze. Shards clink against the rim, tiny bells doing their best. You pour slowly until the pot's belly hums with a patient weight. A quirky trick, taught with a grin. Drop a smooth, fist-sized stone pre-warmed at the fire's edge into the water to encourage a brisk boil without bullying the flames. It settles with a polite plunk, and you feel the potential heat fold neatly through the metal. You adjust the toono so smoke can make its elegant exit without stealing all the warmth. A small draft noses in from the south-facing door, remember? You kept the doorway's honor intact in Section 1, just enough to keep the fire interested, but not enough to gossip ash into the room. A few sparks wander upward like tiny stars trying day jobs. Your modern smoke detector, if it lived here, would request early retirement. You grant it compassionate leave and let the jeer wear its quiet perfume of wool, milk, and clean smoke. Your gloves, abandoned on the peg, are not warming themselves, despite their promises. Why water first? Because bodies are horses, and horses ask for water before grain. Because dried food on the steppe curds, borts, yesterday's dough needs hot water to return from its small stone vacation. Because tea is diplomacy between sleep and intention, and negotiations begin with pouring. Also, the humble chores. Rinse the ladle that kissed fat last night. Soften a strap that froze into a question mark. Thaw a spout that thinks it lives on a glacier. You are not hunting gourmet. You are training calm. Breakfast begins as housekeeping for the body and ends as strategy for the day. Steam writes a soft sentence into the air. You don't read it, you breathe it. You float a wooden spoon and watch small tides tap the rim. When the spoon shivers like a foal's ear, the simmer is sincere. You dip the tip of a puck of aaruul dried curd just to persuade it into being less philosophical and more edible. It doesn't exactly soften, it becomes cooperative, which is all you asked. A first plain cup follows. No leaves yet, only hot water, scandalously minimalist. It treats your throat like a saddle treats a good back support first, ornament later. While the kettle murmurs, you tidy the hearth. Fire has rules here that double as courtesy. You don't step over it, you don't spit into it, and you don't burn trash in it, because the hearth is more elder than appliance. Later there will be a few white drops for blessing. But even now your posture is the quiet kind of respectful that makes rooms calm down. You set out extra cups, though you might be alone. Morning has a talent for inviting company. On the step, a guest crossing a threshold becomes a reason to pour, not a reason to hide the good ladle. Another thread to tuck away. The central hearth, the gollumt, anchors the jar like a compass rose. Beds, chests, saddles, and tools orbit it in a pattern that feet can navigate in darkness. That order keeps nights safe and mornings unhurried. You have started to learn it without bragging. Your hands go to the right place before your head recalls the name. Somewhere a dog turns once and sighs, and you accept the sound as an official stamp of competence. A second quirky helper lives near the cups. A tiny loop of braided horsehair, the simplest filter. If ash drifts into a cup, you set the loop across the rim and pour through it. Practical magic turns, oops, a cinder into, ah, a clear pour. You try it once. The water runs through clean as a plan. Your inner gadget reviewer gives it 5 stars and a thumbs up so gentle it could be a yawn. You briefly imagine opening a luxury brand of horsehair sieves and, mercifully, let the idea fall back asleep. Hot water is generosity that multiplies. It loosens stubborn fat from last night's pot of borts, softens leather where a knot decided to study geology, and warms a scarf so it believes in mornings again. Poured into his skin, it becomes portable mercy. Tucked in a saddlebag, it will still be helpful halfway to the next stream. Boiling also keeps your inner world pleasantly uneventful, the least dramatic gift of all. Calm is an ingredient. You stock it like salt. You sip again, slower, and feel how this small beginning edits the whole day. A kettle-first rhythm means your stomach won't file complaint letters during the first trot. It tells your mind to stop auditioning problems and do the work in front of it. Check girths, choose a mount, divide rations, remember which pouch hides the emergency sweet. It even improves your humor. You can already hear the line about the kettle being a patient dragon curled on treasure that happens to be water. The dragon nods, satisfied with its hoard. The fire asks for a little attention. You nudge in another coin of argal. It accepts the new fuel without theatrics. Dung is not romantic, but it is consistent, and consistency is how breakfast becomes memory rather than struggle. You rotate the pot a quarter turn so heat kisses the cold corner, a small move that feels suspiciously like competency. Outside, a single bird decides morning is legal. Its call bounces off the felt and dissolves into fields of breath. Your smile is the size of a secret you don't need to tell. You pour a small measure onto a cloth and wipe the iron handle, addressing last night's soot like an old bill. A drop flicked onto the latch unstiffens it. Metal responds when it feels seen. In the same spirit, you warm your hands over the steam not to wash as the city insists, but to tell your skin, we begin. The threshold from Section 1 gets a nod as you step around it. Some habits are already teaching your feet where respect lives. A horse snorts at nothing in particular, and you accept the sound as applause. All this and still no food. And somehow you're not impatient. The water has already done half the cooking that will happen today without touching a single grain. It has woken flavors asleep in the walls of pots. It has reclaimed minutes that would otherwise be wasted negotiating with stubbornness. You recognize its cunning. a small, repeatable ritual that invests in every later task. Your future self at noon thanks you in advance and promises not to pick fights with salted tea. The kettle calms. You hook it back an inch from the flame, close enough to stay honest, far enough to stop shouting and listen to the room's mixed choir. A dog's sigh, the horse's gentle tearing of frosted grass, the soft tick of cooling iron. You line up the cups like little moons and breathe once more the sentence that will carry you through long rides and longer days. Begin with water, and the step begins with you. Only then do your eyes wander toward leaf and milk and the pinch of salt that will soon turn this patience into breakfast. You carry the memory of the kettle's breath with you as you step into the pale air, where grass has frosted itself in feathered edges and the herd is dotted like punctuation across the sentence of the step. Mares lift their heads, but don't panic. You are part of the morning grammar now. A foal blinks at you with the exact face of someone deciding whether you're a snack dispenser or a life coach. Your hands smell faintly of clean smoke and warm iron from the hearth, the kind of scent that tells animals you belong here and tells your modern self that cologne is optional. The first task is kindness disguised as procedure. You slip a lead around the foal and tether it near the mare's shoulder. Not far, not tight. The foal nuzzles, latches for a few reassuring swallows, and the mare's body answers with a low, invisible tide. Letdown. Mainstream fact. Mongol herders typically let the foal start the milk flow, then gently move it aside so a person can milk quickly. The foal is the union rep for the udder, and negotiations go smoother with them present. If the mare is a fidgeter, a soft hobble keeps her hind legs from improvising slapstick. You talk to her in the language all animals understand: steady breath, slow hands, no debate. Your pail is light, the rim polished by years of mornings. You crouch with knees that have learned the choreography of patience, slide the foal a half step away, and begin. The streams hit the bucket wall with a quiet pap-pap rhythm, thin and bright. Mare's milk arrives like a polite champagne, lower in fat than cow's milk, higher in lactose, sweet on the tongue, almost silvery. That composition matters. It refuses to curdle into heavy cheeses easily, and instead begs for fermentation, which is why your mind already drifts toward the leather bag waiting back at the jar. You keep one ear on the horse and the other on the weather. Hooves scuff frost into tiny comets. A lark, convinced it is management, takes attendance. The mare chews in thoughtful loops, tail flicking the cold like a curt reply. Your fingers work a rhythm smooth enough to make the pail tremble with mirror ripples. A teasing joke wanders through your head. Your smartwatch would count each squeeze as a rep, and by lunch you'd be declared a champion of functional fitness. You decline the medal and keep milking. Before you came out, you dipped your fingers in the kettle's hot water and wiped the pails inside with a clean cloth. A little heat makes everything cooperative, from iron to hands. You set a small horsehair loop your traveling filter over a cup on a nearby stump. When the pail is 3 fingers full, you pour a splash through the loop and watch the milk ribbon into the cup, cloud pure. The filter is 1 strand away from being a joke, and yet somehow 5-star equipment. You consider filing a patent for ultra-minimalist barista kit and let the idea wander off to graze. The first sip is warm meadow. You taste yesterday's grasses translated into sweetness, a flicker of salt from the mare's winter lick, and the kind of freshness that makes bottled labels feel poetic and unnecessary. You offer a ceremonial drop back to the ground, white for the sky, white for luck, because you've learned that breakfast moves easier when gratitude gets the first bowl. Quirky tidbit. Some camps hang the fermenting bag by the doorway so everyone coming and going can punch or nudge it in passing, turning the whole household into a gentle, all-day churn. Motion is mother's helper. You fill a skin with the rest and walk it toward the gur, where the leather bag khokhuur waits with the stubborn dignity of a veteran suitcase. Inside is the living memory of last week's airag, a sour-sweet starter that wakes up when fresh milk arrives. You untie the thong, pour a controlled stream, and hear the leathery throat gulp as bubbles shift. The bag is stitched from hide, seams rubbed with fat. It smells of summers you haven't met. You massage it with both hands until the mixture relaxes. Fermentation here is a duet between lactobacilli and yeast. Lactic tang, gentle fizz, a tiny chorus of microbes doing choreography you'll never see but will always taste. Historians still argue whether references in medieval sources to kumis, airag, or similar drinks always mean mare's milk, or whether scribes sometimes lumped camel or mixed dairies under the same word. Language, like milk, has regional accents. What doesn't need debate is the role. A portable, lightly alcoholic, sparkling food that calms thirst and stores energy in a form that rides well. By evening, today's edition will be a friendly buzz of bubbles. By tomorrow, it will be the quiet courage in your cup. You hang the bag back by the door close enough to greet, far enough from the hearth's kisses, and give it 3 practical thumps. In many households, guests are invited to shake or stir the bag as they enter, as natural as wiping boots. Hospitality and fermentation share a handle. You can feel the day starting to circulate through this ritual. Milk travels from pasture to bag, from bag to bowl, and back to pasture in the strength it lends to bodies who ride. If you listen carefully, you swear you can hear the bag purring like a very large cat that ate a yogurt factory. A neighbor drifts over, hat pulled low, offering a soft hello that means, "I smelled morning." You hand them a wooden cup with yesterday's finished airag. It foams slightly, tiny beads rising like a thought remembered. The taste is calm, mischief, tangy, cool, barely alcoholic. Mainstream fact worth anchoring. Traditional airag tends to sit around 1 to 3% alcohol by volume, more a sparkle than a stagger, though strength can vary with season, temperature, and elbow grease. Your neighbor takes a sip, eyes narrowed in the way of a seasoned critic, then nods, the universal nod that says yes. Back at the mare, the foal wins its second appointment. You let them nurse long enough to make the morning feel fair. The mare snorts a soft opinion about your technique, and you accept the feedback. You scan the herd for signs: a tender pastern, a winter coat too fluffy for serious miles, a smear of dried mud that tells the story of a small river argument. Each note goes into the ledger in your head where today's rides, chores, and potential guests will be sorted. The ledger has 2 columns: do now and let wind decide. The wind gets a lot of votes out here. You carry the pail toward the gur with a walk learned from 100 careful mornings. Steady knees, arms relaxed, gaze on the horizon, not the rim. Inside, you pour a sweet ration into a smaller pot, the one that will team up with tea and salt later. The rest you keep for the bag, with a shy reserve for a child who will appear, wooden cup in hand, with perfect timing and no announcement. The hearth, pleased by your return, gives a few welcoming clicks. Your gloves hang exactly where you left them, continuing their noble career of not warming themselves. You examine the milks line on the pail, the meniscus is a mood ring, and feel a quiet satisfaction. Enough for tea, enough for airag, enough to share. In this economy, sharing is the best interest rate. You wipe the rim with a cloth rinsed in the kettle's leftover warmth and set the pail where the dog won't learn terrible habits. A stray thought surfaces: how far could an army move if every camp did this with the same unhurried competence? There's your answer in the cup. Light and practical. Farther than opponents expect, with better humor. Because humor matters, you allow yourself a 3rd tiny joke. If your city cafe served mare's milk sparkling yogurt adjacent, they'd charge $12 and a podcast. Here, it costs a walk, a patient hand, and remembering the foal's feelings. The reward is not just hydration or calories. It's a mood steadied, elastic, quietly ready. You feel that readiness settle in like a scarf you didn't know you needed. You give the bag one last persuasive shake, listening for the soft thunder of emerging bubbles. A drop for the hearth will come later with tea, but milk has already threaded luck into the room. Outside, the lark finally approves the day's agenda. Inside, you pour a measure of fresh milk into a waiting pot and think of the salted comfort to come. The kettle, still warm from water-first wisdom, smiles in iron. You set the pot where the flame is most polite and let the morning's second river begin to steam, knowing that what you've started, tether, draw, ferment, share will carry you and the herd through miles with the calm of someone who drinks their courage, white and sparkling. You return to the hearth with the day quietly organized. Water has behaved, milk has been persuaded, and now you're ready for the bowl that knits the morning together: suutei, tsai, salted milk tea. The iron kettle still carries a warm memory of steam. You lift it closer to the coals and listen for that confident murmur that says, "I'm awake." On the low shelf sits a dark brick of tea, scored like a chocolate bar that went to military school. You snap off 2 squares with the back of your knife, no heroics, drop them into a small pot of simmering water, and watch the flakes loosen like riders easing out of their saddles. The first fragrance is leathery and green-brown, a meadow after rain translated through smoke. You give the leaves time to be themselves. Rushing tea is like rushing a horse into icy water, technically possible, spiritually unwise. Mainstream fact, tucked where you can reach it later. Mongolian households have long brewed suutei tsai by boiling compressed tea, often Chinese bricks, in water, then adding milk and salt for a pale, savory cup that shows up at almost every mealtime, especially mornings. The brew darkens to a cloudy amber. You lift the pot and pour in today's fresh milk, the one you convinced from the mare a few minutes ago, and the color drifts toward warm linen. Salt next, just a pinch. The difference between flat and comforting. Your city brain raises an eyebrow. Salt in tea? Out here the answer is yes. Because sweat exists, miles exist, and a cup can be both hydration and a tiny treaty with your muscles. You nick a thumb-wide piece of butter, the good kind that remembers grass and summer, and slip it into the pot. It sails once and melts, leaving a quiet sheen across the surface. If last night's cooking left a patient spoonful of tail-fat, mellow sheep sweet, a dash can go in too. You whisk with a carved wooden stick, but mostly you ladle and drop, pouring from shoulder height back into the pot in smooth arcs until the tea thickens slightly and shows a polite foam. Every household swears their method keeps the peace. Yours is to pour without splashing and think calm thoughts at the bubbles. You try a sip from the ladle. Warmth spreads like a good rumor. The tea doesn't shout leaf or milk or salt. It says together. The flavor is savory, silky, like soup that decided to be a drink. You feel your shoulders untense in increments. Outside, hooves scratch frost into powder. Inside, the hearth answers with a knitting needle tick. You test seasoning not with a chef's swagger, more like a librarian straightening a shelf. Another 2 grains of salt, then a second of butter, thin as patience, and the cup becomes the kind that makes your hands linger around it for reasons you can't explain to a spreadsheet. A quirky tidbit walks in wearing a grin. Travelers sometimes carry those tough tea bricks in their saddlebags, the way you might carry a portable battery. Dense, reliable, weirdly comforting. In some camps, a tiny wedge of brick tea was a friendly gift. The pocket-sized kindness you could trade for a story, a favor, or the right to borrow a better joke. You break an extra sliver now, more for the symbolism than strength, and tuck it near the cups as if to say, stay a while. You line the bowls like little moons and pour for the room. First ladle for the hearth, only a few white drops flick to the smoke hole to keep the luck fluent, then one for whoever sits nearest the door, even if the door is only the idea of a guest you haven't met yet. Hospitality on the steppe doesn't require a script. It requires a bowl. You remember the horsehair loop from Water Hour and set it across a cup. A belt and suspenders move in case Ash tries to crash the party. The tea slides through clean, the surface glossed and steady. You drink, slow. The warmth moves through you in manageable miles. You can feel why this is a rider's breakfast. Not heavy, not sugary, yet suspiciously good at turning "please don't make me trot" into all right one valley. You chew a corner of boortsog, the friendly fried dough from the shelf, and dip it shamelessly. It obligingly becomes a spoon that you definitely return. Eventually. Your second joke of the morning floats up. Somewhere, a barista is inventing savory latte, open steppe edition, and charging triple for the pinch of salt and the story about wind. Historians still argue whether the salted dairy tea habit reached Mongol tables by way of Tibetan butter tea along caravan routes, or whether it grew in parallel across several pastoral cultures that solved the same problem: how to carry warmth, electrolytes, and calories in one bowl that forgives travel. Trade records show leaves and bricks traveling north. Oral memory insists grandmothers were doing this long before ledgers became trendy. The argument is gentle as debates go, more about map arrows than about whether the cup is wonderful. You lift your bowl, which is the only answer you need in this room. A child appears, each footfall officially small, offering a wooden cup with 2 hands. You pour a little and blow across the surface until the steam leans away from heat. Their eyes tilt like they're trying to memorize adulthood 1 sip at a time. They dunk a cube of aaruul, stubborn, dried, curd, and nibble until the edges surrender. You file away another tiny hack. If you crumble aaruul into the tea and wait a minute, it becomes a shy porridge, proof that patience has a texture. Your hands find a rhythm. Pour, whisk, sip, breathe. You top up the pot with a ladle of hot water from the kettle when the level sinks below friendly. The color holds. The salt keeps the line of flavor straight. A guest steps in with a particular nod that means, "Dawn offered me to you," and you push a bowl their way without commentary. They accept, and the silence between first and second sips does the talking. Outside, the herd begins to bow their heads into hay with the concentration of scholars who prefer not to be graded. You remember a detail your future self will brag about in a low voice. If you whisk the tea by pouring between 2 pots from a gentle height, you fold in air and emulsify the butter without clumps, and the surface blushes with a fine foam that looks like a small storm deciding to be kind. The technique is older than anyone in the room and younger than the next person to add too much salt. Your third joke winks. Congratulations. You've mastered latte art. Step edition, your best design so far is warm circle. Trade, trails, thread through the taste. Another mainstream note worth keeping. Brick tea was once a commodity so valued across Inner Asia that it functioned as currency in some regions and time periods. Caravans hauled it along the same routes that ferried silk, felt, and news. You don't need that fact to enjoy the bowl, but knowing it adds a soft echo of camel bells to the steam. The empire, when it was in its long stride, turned leaves into mornings in places where trees were shy. Your cup, in that sense, is a very small world map. For all the tradition, kitchens are experimental. Some households add a breath of baking soda to tame bitterness and shift the color. Others swear it's an insult to both leaf and cow. Some swear by green brick tea, others by coarse black. A few finish with a slip of clotted cream arome because if the morning is already kind, why not help it be kinder? You choose restraint now, promising future you an afternoon bowl with cream if miles behave. You finish slowly, feeling the tea's logic smoothing the edges of whatever the day thinks it is. The mare snorts. The dog edits a dream with a single decisive twitch. The hearth ticks once like a metronome relieved of duty. You rinse the ladle with a mouthful of hot water, wipe it dry with a cloth that smells like faithful service, and hang it where the next hour will find it without searching. Your hands hum with the precise kind of readiness that never startles anyone. The bowl leaves a ring on the low table, a pale moon that will evaporate before noon, a reminder that good mornings don't need witnesses, only repeats. You breathe, and the room breathes with you. Suutei has done the quiet arithmetic of morning. Warm plus salt plus a memory of grass equals a rider who will not quarrel with wind. You set one last cup for the road, let it cool to rideable, and smile at the thought that somewhere, a foamy bag of airag just purred because it knows its turn comes later. Breakfast isn't finished. It has simply settled into the soft gear that the rest of the day will use. The Steppe approves by doing nothing dramatic at all. You eye the low table like a map of small mercies, a shallow wooden bowl of boortsog stacked in neat geometry, a cloth pouch of aaruul knotted like a traveling pillow, and, on the shelf above the hearth, a linen bundle of borts, thin strips of air-dried meat, waiting for hot water to turn flint into kindness. The kettle, that patient dragon from earlier, keeps a polite simmer, and your cup of suutei rests within reach, creamy and calm. Breakfast here is a sequence, not a showpiece portable favors arranged to make the first miles of the day behave. The argal fire breathes evenly, a tidy elder that approves of good decisions. You rub your hands and accept that the gloves still refuse to warm themselves. Fine. Warmth will start from the inside. You begin where crunch meets comfort. Boortsog first. Fried dough that pretends to be humble and then hugs you like a quilt. You choose one shaped like a small knot. Some households prefer diamonds, others braids or stars, and pinch its warm flank. The surface is gently blistered, the inside tender the way morning voices are tender. Mainstream fact to pocket. Boortsog is a Central Asian staple, fried in tallow or oil. In Mongol homes it sits at ordinary breakfasts, and at celebratory tables without changing its tone, just the size of the pile. You breathe over it once, let the steam find your nose, and you're nearly persuaded you invented kindness. Dipping is half the point. You wedge one end into the salted milk tea and let it drink. The crust relaxes, the crumb swells, and your cup becomes a sauce. Your city brain whispers about croissants. The steppe offers something sturdier and less fussy. Light joke 1. Somewhere a cafe is selling nomad donuts with savory latte and charging a horse. You bite anyway, and the dough yields with a quiet sweetness that remembers the pan. If clotted cream arome waits in the small jar, a finger's worth turns the boortsog into soft thunder. You keep the portion modest. A long day does not like a sluggish rider. Across the table, the pouch of aaruul looks unrepentant. Dried curds, sun-hardened, sour bright, and about as forgiving as a chess piece. You untie the cord and spill a few pebbled pieces into your palm. They are white as cloud edges and dense as a stubborn idea. Children treat them like pocket candy. Grandmothers treat them like insurance. You try a bite and your jaw files for overtime. Aaruul is endurance disguised as snack milk curdled, pressed, then dried on roof racks or ropes until even rain respects it. A pinch of it wakes the mouth, scours sleep from the tongue, and reminds you that comfort and discipline can share a bowl. Aaruul also knows a softer path. You crush a piece between 2 wooden spoons until it skitters into white gravel, then crumble it into a cup and add a finger of hot water from the kettle. Swirl, wait, and a quick, tangy slurry appears yogurt that learned to travel. Let boortsog dip there, and you've invented a tiny festival no one has to announce. Light joke 2 arrives on schedule. If a celebrity chef plated this deconstructed steppe parfait, there would be a cue and a manifesto. You eat it with 0 paperwork. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some camps string aaruul into little necklaces for children. On long rides, edible jewelry that quiets both boredom and appetites. You glance at the linen bundle and plan the next move. Strips of lean meat, sliced thin and hung high in clean air, surrendered their moisture weeks ago and became feathery, brownish strands that keep for months if you behave. You fetch the bundle, shave a careful handful into the simmering kettle, and watch the water turn confident. The smell is low and honest, like rain in a saddle shed after good work. Mainstream fact worth keeping. Borts let riders carry the protein of many meals in a light, durable form centuries. Old instant soup. A few pinches in boiling water make stock fast. If time is friendly, dumplings or noodles follow, but they are optional when wind has a schedule. The broth arrives with a small bow. You add a pinch of salt, maybe a few threads of last summer's dried onion if your stores are polite, and, with 2 fingers, flick a ceremonial drop toward the smoke hole so luck remembers the address. Pour a ladle over yesterday's breadcrumbs in a wooden bowl and they vanish into comfort. Meat that once insisted on teeth now cooperates with spoons. You take a sip. It's clean and direct. A straightforward sentence in a world that loves adjectives. Your shoulders lower by 3 quiet degrees. The hearth ticks approval like a contented metronome. Boortsog returns for duty as edible spoon. You swab the bowl and grin at how quickly the dough negotiates with broth. Somewhere in your head a spreadsheet tries to count macros. You pat it kindly and pass it a piece of aaruul to keep it busy. Outside, hooves move in the grass with the sound of felt being folded. Inside, the dog achieves eye contact strong enough to melt glaciers. You roll a plain corner of dough its way and keep the meat for riders and guests. The dog forgives you immediately and resumes guarding the door from imaginary crimes. Another handful of borts goes in, and you consider thickening the brew. Some mornings call for a dusting of flour and a quick pinch of tiny dumplings, a soup with no ego, only warmth. Other mornings prefer clarity, the kind where tea and broth share a tent and no one complains. Historians still argue whether campaigning riders truly ate meat at breakfast, as often as later stories claim, or whether most dons leaned dairy-heavy, with borts saved for evenings and hard pushes. The truth likely rotates with season, pasture, and orders. Your bowl rotates towards seconds. The table reveals its quiet philosophy. White foods the Sagan ID beloved during Lunar New Year have their own gravity here. Curds, clotted cream, dried cheeses, milk, and yes, boortsog by the hill. Another mainstream note to file. At Sagan Sar, households stack platters of boortsog and dairy into hopeful towers for guests. A domestic architecture of welcome where height whispers prosperity. Today isn't a festival. You build a small, private hill of okayness and leave it at that. Your horsehair loop lies ready beside the cups, just in case a theatrical ash tries to crash a pour. You check the borts again. It still has the color of distant hills and the texture of strict advice. Stored high on a rope, it stays away from curious noses and temptation. Carried on the move, it becomes security. The meal you can cook with one hand while the other holds reins. Light joke 3 for the tally. This is the original meal prep. Except your containers are linen and your refrigerator is a well-behaved breeze. You shave a little extra and lay it near the hearth's edge to replace what you used. A savings account denominated in fibers of meat. Your thoughts drift to supply lines, the quiet engine behind speed. Portable foods like these keep mornings gentle even on marching days. The broth you just made could happen at a postal relay, an örtöö, or under a sky that can't be bothered to be a roof. Historians still argue whether the imperial post always provided reliable rations, or whether travelers romanticized convenience. Season, herd size, and distance meddle with certainty. What stays undeniable in your bowl is the engineering. Slice thin, dry high, carry light, rehydrate fast logistics that taste like comfort. Aaruul returns for a small encore. You hold a pebble under your tongue while you finish your tea. It melts at the pace of patience and keeps your mouth pleasantly occupied, the way bead counting calms hands. You remember the airag bag by the door and give it a friendly shake as you pass. It answers with a soft purr, the house pet that drinks milk and makes bubbles. If a guest crosses the threshold right now, they'll get first bowl without negotiation. Hospitality is the easiest math the Steppe ever wrote. The kettle relaxes from simmer to syllable. You ladle a final, pour over a pinch of shaved borts, let it stand, and decant into a skin for later a mobile comfort to be uncorked where wind tries to be dramatic. Bowls return to their places without clatter. The wooden spoon resumes honor after a brief windowsill sabbatical. You wipe the table with a warm cloth that smells faintly of milk and ash. The toono breathes a patient draft that remembers to leave warmth behind. You pack a short stack, 3 boortsog nested in cloth, a pouch of aaruul stones, a twist of powdered borts, and your horsehair loop, because Ash loves drama and you don't. The suutei taa has cooled to rideable. You lift your cup toward the bag of airag again, a nod to the day's later sparkle, and set it down, steady and capped. The morning has taught you 3 tastes, crisp, tangy, savory, and shown how each can travel. So you can, too. The last bite is small on purpose. You want the next hill to sharpen your appetite, not your temper. You sit 1 minute longer than necessary, because that is how patience learns your name. When you stand, you do not step on the threshold. Your feet already know their manners. You nod toward the hearth elder who offered you heat, soup, and a place where steam could practice being visible. Breakfast isn't a finish. It's a kind of map, and you fold it carefully into your pocket as you reach for the waiting saddle, quiet leather, promising quiet miles. You step outside with a basket and a patience you didn't know you owned, because breakfast continues with the quietest ingredient, fuel. The pasture looks clean until your eyes switch to herder mode. Then you see discs and patties of yesterday's work, sun, cured into argal that stacks like coins for a stove that respects thrift. You tap each piece with a knuckle hollow means ready, damp means tomorrow, and build a tidy pile that would impress even the kettle dragon from earlier. You're not gathering wood. Wood is a rumor on this grass ocean. You gather what the herd has already edited, and you do it with the same courtesy you show the threshold. Back by the hearth, You treat the embers like old friends. No shouting, no grand gestures. A palm-sized fragment first, angled so its edge catches the ember's gossip. Then a wider disc laid partly on, partly off, making a little bridge where flame can learn to walk again. Argal rewards order. Too much at once and you smother the elder. Too little and breakfast turns into a lecture about consequences. Your horsehair loop, retired from tea duty for the moment, waits nearby in case Ash has ambitions. The toono opens one hand width. South door cracked a finger, draft balanced like reins between two fingers. You give the fire the same leadership you give a good horse, calm, clear, and boring in the best way. Mainstream fact to keep. On the steppe, dried dung has long been the primary household fuel, prized for steady heat, low sparking, and a predictable ash that's easy to live with. Travelers' accounts and modern surveys agree that it stays the backbone of Gare stoves, where trees are shy and winds are not. You learn this with your body more than your brain, as the heat firms into a patient, even spine. The smell is faint and honest, grassy, with a hint of smoke, less campground drama, more laundry telling a story about summer. Your gloves observe all this and continue their lifelong project of not warming themselves. You stack more thoughtfully than greedily. Edges aligned so air can sit between pieces. Heat prefers geometry. A 3-piece teepee for boil, a 2-piece bridge for simmer, a flat pad for frying boortsog if the day changes its mind and requests seconds. You slide one coin aside and watch how the flame follows it, as if the fire has a favorite seat at the table. You can steer heat here with one finger and a habit. Light joke 1. Congratulations, you now own a Michelin star dung stove. Your only inspector is the dog, who awards 4 tail wags and a hopeful stare at nothing in particular. Flavor sneaks in through fuel in ways you can't see but can definitely taste. The salted tea from earlier, when it sits low over a disciplined argal bed, loses all bitterness and becomes the warm blanket version of itself. The borts broth clarifies, speaking in straightforward sentences, not smoky paragraphs. If you rush and build hot, you scald milk and teach it to sulk. If you dawdle and build thin, you wait forever for anything to admit it's cooking. Today you find the middle, a flame that barely shows off, a simmer that speaks in syllables, not exclamation points. You rake the ash with a stick and study it the way gardeners study soil. Quirky tidbit drifting in. Some herders will tell you they can guess what the herd grazed. By the way, argal burns spring herbs give a sweeter smoke. Winter stubble burns hotter and faster, half folklore, half lab report delivered by a poop sommelier. You grin, but the insight works. On herb-heavy weeks, your broth finishes kinder, and your felt walls hold a gentler perfume. You save a small bowl of fine ash. Mixed with a splash of water, it becomes a mild alkali paste that scrubs pots beautifully. Free dish soap, courtesy of breakfast. Smoke is a tool if you let it be. You set a trivet high above the shoulder of the flame and hang a small net of aaruul to warm, not melt. The heat kisses away last night's stubbornness so today's jaw won't file a grievance. A ribbon of smoke passes over the curds and you swear the flavor lifts a note, like a chorus finding harmony. You lay a slender ribbon of borts on a stick near the hearth's cheek where warmth gathers without boiling, and it exhales its salt back into the room. Everything around the fire learns to be more itself, not less. Your mind wanders, productively, to logistics, to how fuel intelligence scales up. Historians still argue whether long-range Mongol campaigns relied mostly on foraging dung and brush as they went, or whether dedicated fuel caravans, pack animals carrying sacks of dried patties, shadowed the army for heavy-use nodes like forges and command camps. Chronicles tease, archaeology hints, and the wind refuses to footnote. What your morning proves is that a small household can be nearly fuel autonomous. The herd feeds the fire that cooks the food, that fuels the riders who guard the herd. A neat circle, drawn in steam and hoofprints. Inside the jar, the stovepipe, when there is one, has manners learned from the toono. In older setups, the smoke hole alone carries the conversation with the sky. In newer iron stoves, a pipe persuades draft to act like a polite guest. You adjust the draw until the flame drops from excited puppy to sleepy cat. and the kettle answers with that low, confident murmur you now crave. Another small joke, as promised. Your city smoke alarm would declare a state of emergency by now. But here, the only alert system is the dog dreaming of administrative duties. You tend to the fuel the way you tend to horses rotate. Rest. Choose for the job. Thin chips go first, to spark humility. Thicker cakes take over for stamina. Cracked pieces become the quick heat for a surprise pot of noodles if neighbors wander in with news. You keep a handful of tiny slivers nearby, like matches in reverse. One flick, and you can lift a simmer back to attention without scaring it. The rhythm becomes addicting. Add, nudge, listen. Add, nudge, listen. You're coaxing, not commanding. The ash bed becomes a quiet technology all its own. Wrapped around the pot's base, it acts like a gasket, conserving heat and keeping the boil from using up the morning's patience. You bank a curl of embers to one side, future use favor for lunchtime reheat, and tug the largest argal coin just a fingertip farther from the heart, so the broth settles from brisk to thoughtful. In the corner, the airag bag registers the room's steady climate with a small, smug purr. Fermentation hates big drama and adores this kind of even, unhurried warmth. You consider the wider map again. Mainstream context to pocket. As iron stoves spread in the 19th and 20th centuries, many jurors moved from open hearths to enclosed fireboxes. But the fuel stayed largely the same where pasture did dung, with seasonal supplements of brush, twigs, and the occasional precious log. Travelers wrote about the neat stacks of patties drying against windbreaks, a domestic skyline of future breakfasts. The pattern lives on because it makes sense. Fuel you don't have to buy, haul from forests you don't have, or beg from neighbors becomes a form of freedom you can warm your hands over. You finish with the small rituals that make good habits stick. Tap the ash bowl level like smoothing a pillow. Lay tomorrow's first coin where your sleepy hands will find it. Close the toono a breath and the door a hair so the room stays a degree kinder without letting the air forget to trade stories. Light joke 3. You award yourself Fire Whisperer of the Month, a title with no certificate and excellent benefits. The dog seconds the motion with a sigh. Your gloves, unrepentant, remain cold and dignified. The flame now is the exact size of patience. The kettle doesn't shout. It hums. Tea waits for a top-up. Broth considers second helpings. Boortsog plots a comeback. You sit for a minute and watch how smoke writes a sentence up the pipe and out to the sky. Punctuation steady. No exclamation points required. Somewhere outside, a horse shakes frost from its forelock, and the sound beads through the felt like small bells. Breakfast has become a conversation between fire and breath. With you as the translator who keeps both calm, you add one last coin to the stack. A quiet promise that warmth will be here when you come back from miles that haven't happened yet. Then you stand, careful of the hearth's dignity, and step away with the smell of clean heat stitched into your sleeves, ready to pack those pocket breakfasts you assembled earlier and let the morning move. You lay the saddlebags flat like open books, felt on the outside and common sense on the inside. Breakfast goes portable now, rations becoming decisions becoming miles. You set your knee on the right bag so the wind doesn't edit your plan and start portioning with the calm of someone who knows that hunger is best coached, not surprised. The room keeps quiet. The hearth breathes. The dog pretends not to supervise. In your head, you divide the day into valleys, ridges, and excuses to sip. First, the liquids that behave like companions. One skin you dedicate to hot things that will cool. A half portion of suutei from the kettle, salted just enough to keep your thoughts tidy. Another skin you fill with plain water, because not every moment requires conversation. You cap both tight and rub a smear of fat around the stoppers to keep them honest. The tea skin nests higher in the bag so it won't sit against cold air and sulk. The water skin goes lower, good-natured in any weather. You promise yourself a rule you've seen work. A swallow at the top of each rise, 2 at the bottom, 3 if the wind thinks it's hilarious. Dried food next, the small chorus that sings between sips. You count boortsog like a miser with a soft heart, 1 for the first hour, 1 for the long hour that always arrives after, and a reserve that you swear you won't touch but will absolutely touch if a road gets longer than it looks. You wrap them in cloth so they don't abrade each other into crumbs, then tuck the packet where your left hand finds it without looking. Aaruul gets democracy. 3 stones to the belt pouch, moral support. A small handful to the left bag, routine. And 1 odd-shaped chunk into the little pocket. You always forget future. Use treasure. Powdered borts you treat like an apology you'll be glad to have ready. You pour a palmful into a twist of cloth, tie it, then make 3 more. If a stream plays fair later, 1 twist becomes broth in a cup. If snow is the only water, the same twist asks for patience and still pays. Mainstream fact worth anchoring. Borts is feather, light, and long-keeping, which is why steppe travelers could boil a meal in minutes. A pinch in hot water builds stock, and stock becomes soup with almost anything added: noodles, dumplings, or nothing but relief. You push the cloth twists into a wooden box that knows their shape already. You set the horsehair loop beside the cups because Ash loves drama even outdoors. A small pouch for salt, coarse, stubborn, goes near it. You don't bury salt in a bag unless you enjoy searching your feelings mid-wind. Quirky tidbit slips in smiling. Many riders keep a personal pinch jar or a tiny leather salt pouch on their belt. Not just for taste, but for thawing ice from a strap or waking a dull broth. Salt here is seasoning and tool, etiquette and first aid. You give your pouch a pat that is 20% culinary and 80% superstition. Weight is a language you speak with your hands. You distribute the heavy bottoms toward the girth line, light and fragile toward the outside. Nothing hard enough to bruise a horse with a day's rhythm. The left bag gets the tea skin and boortsog. The right bag takes the water skin and borts twists. The belt holds aaruul and the knife that dislikes singing but enjoys working. You add a short spoon, carved thin and smooth, and a collapsible cup that used to be a gourd before it learned discipline. A flint and steel kit slides in near the ladle. Your gloves, continuing their prestigious career of not warming themselves, get stuffed on top like disobedient clouds. You tie each strap with knots your fingers can undo after an hour of cold and 2 hours of good decisions. The girth will feel different with bags loaded, so you mark the hole with a bit of thread, a quiet reminder to check later. To prevent the tea skin from bouncing into melodrama, you lace it once through a leather loop and lay a soft cloth under it. No squeaks allowed. You picture the first trot. Nothing knocks, nothing clanks, nothing accuses you of poor planning. The dog yawns approval. Your schedule writes itself in morsels. First ridge, a sip of tea and a boortsog corner. The long flat beside the reed beds. An aaruul stone under the tongue and water when you spot the 3rd lark. The shallow ford past the willow snag. Halt long enough to stir 1 borts twist into a cup and call it soup. You repeat the pattern until it becomes spinal cord, not calendar. By the time the sun forgets that it's morning, your body won't have to petition for fuel. It will get a small kindness every time the landscape changes sentence. You tuck a tiny rag of cloth, the color of practical, around the mouth of the tea skin to wipe stray fat before it can perfume the inside of your bag. You add a 2nd rag because you always forget the first exists. A spare thong goes in for emergencies, which is to say, for everything that qualifies as Tuesday. Your belt gets a little needle casebone lid. Thread inside because leather has opinions and straps forget themselves. Light joke 1. You briefly consider packing a napkin with embroidered geese. The wind vetoes the geese. You accept the ruling. You inventory the pockets you'll actually use. Right breast under the deal. The knife, short and honest. Left sleeve, a flat tin with strong tea shavings and a single sugar lump you pretend isn't there. Waist sash. The salt pouch and a roll of thin jerky, in case you want to chew rather than sip your patience. Inside the saddle flap, flint, steel, tinder, and the collapsible cup that turns a handful of snow into a promise. You practice the reach eyes up, hand down, item found until even your shadow looks competent. Your plan respects terrain. If the wind runs crosswise, you'll drink more tea and less water. If the sun turns smug, you'll reverse it. If a stream appears where the map of your bones thought it wouldn't, you'll top both skins and drop a white blessing for luck. Historians still argue whether imperial couriers were rationed centrally at every relay or mostly carried their own basics between waypoints, with stations supplying fresh horses and emergency food. Either way, Riders who arrived calm had a habit of feeding themselves early and small. The Empire's great speed rests on thousands of tiny, boring decisions like the one you make now. Another swallow before that ridge. Mainstream note to keep in your pocket. The Mongol saddle's high wooden pommel and cantle give you a locked-in seat and handy tie points. Bags ride high and stable, and archery doesn't have to quarrel with luggage. You loop a strap through the forward arch and feel how the weight tucks in, away from the horse's kidneys, balanced like a well-behaved sentence. Nothing drags, nothing flaps. Nothing negotiates in the wind louder than you do. A moment for airag, not for riding, not this hour, but you decant a small measure into a tight-necked bottle and wrap it in felt for the evening's reward. Moving bubbles dislike open gates. They're happier as a sunset treaty. You label it in your mind, "Do not open until the sky forgets blue," and set it deep, where temptation would need a map and a permit. You consider weather's pranks. Snow? You'll melt a hatful in the gourd, season with a pinch of salt and a whisper of borts, and call it a clinic on morale. Heat? You'll float tea leaves in cold water and let the day invent faint iced suutei, which no one markets because no one here names obvious blessings. Light joke, too. You contemplate inventing the world's first nomad hydration app. It pings whenever a crane calls. You decide to leave the cranes out of it. A final check with your hands, the best inspectors. You bounce each bag, feeling for thuds. You run your palm along every strap, letting fingertips find what eyes forget. You pull the belt pouch closed, shake it, listen for the delicate clack of aaruul like tiny river stones. The motions are unhurried, like folding a letter to someone you like. When you lift the bags to the saddle line, they sit as if they meant to be there all along. You write the last line of the plan on your tongue, small, often, before you want. It turns appetite from an ambush into a scheduled guest. The hearth ticks a farewell. The kettle exhales like a singer after a calm song. You shoulder the bags, grateful that a day's peace can be measured in spoons and sips. Light joke 3. On cue. You whisper to your stubborn gloves that they can come along anyway. They refuse warmth, but excel at looking responsible. Outside, the air has the color of steel that forgives fingerprints. You hook the left bag, then the right, cinch the belly, smooth the flaps. You press each stopper, tug each thong, pat each pocket, and then stand still for the length of a breath to let your mind catch up with your hands. Breakfast has learned to travel. Your hunger is now a rhythm instead of a complaint. You swing the tea skin gently. It answers with a hush. When you take the reins, the bags and the day agree on a simple sentence. No surprises, only repeats. You move with the house like a clock hand that knows the hour without looking. The jar is already awake in layers, embers deciding to be flame, tea pretending to be soup, felt walls making weather reasonable. You don't announce yourself. You fit into the traffic pattern everyone learned before they learned their names. Your job is simple. Don't block the door. Don't trip the dog. Don't make the kettle dragon roll its eyes. Tasks are braided rather than fenced. You pick up a broom of twigs and sweep a slow circle from hearth to threshold. Not to chase dust, but to smooth the day's temper. A wooden ladle rests across the pot as a civilized no arguments sign. The dog reads it perfectly and stops lobbying for soup. Hands younger than yours slip by with a bundle of argal coins, stacking them in toddler straight towers that the hearth elder accepts with surprising dignity. Someone checks the airag bag and gives it 3 thumps the household cat you feed by massaging. You move to the chest against the east wall and fold tonight's spare deal with a care that seems ceremonial until you realize it is. Fabric loves respect and pays back in warmth. Mainstream fact worth anchoring. Inside a traditional jur, the space is mapped. Women's work and storage tend east, men's gear and saddles lean west, and the honored seat with household altar faces north, opposite the south-facing door. You don't need a compass. Your feet know where tea lives, where tack lives, where guests will sit without being told. Even the horsehair loop has its place, coiled near the cups like a polite snake that filters instead of bites. Voices stay low. Work keeps the beat. A child counts boortsog into a cloth with the solemnity of accounting. Their mouth counts separately, less solemnly. A grandmother warms aaruul pebbles near the stove's shoulder so breakfast won't become a dentistry lesson. You measure salt into a leather pouch, pinch by pinch no more. No less because miles punish sloppy seasoning harder than any teacher. The dog performs an inspection of bags and sits with an admin's sigh. Light joke 1. You promote the dog to project manager and promise them stock options in the form of crumbs. Outside, the herd scribbles its morning signatures on frost, and you follow someone older to the picket line for the quiet inventory. Hooves, eyes, tempers. You don't make notes. You absorb them. A patch of rubbed hair says, adjust the girth later. A half-moon chip on a shoe says, talk to iron when the sun climbs. A mare side-eyes you, remembering your milking technique with grudging respect. You apologize with a rub that smells like tea and felt. You bring back news without words. The gur understands. Chores shift a few degrees to balance the weather in the yard. The household is a chorus where parts swap for harmony. A boy who can't lift the water bucket yet can spin rope into a new hobble with hands that remember 3 generations of knots. An aunt sharpens awl and needle, setting a repair station on the west where leather learns humility. A cousin ties extra thongs to the saddle arches and tests them with that tug you can identify blindfolded. Historians still argue whether the famous flexibility of steppe households, women running camps, managing herds, even making strategic calls while men rode long, was universal or mostly visible in elite circles. The written record loves great names, but your dawn shows the pattern at ground level. Everyone does what keeps the wind from winning. The teapot hums correction when someone tries to rush it. You answer by skimming a tiny film of butter into the surface and pouring once from a height, the steppe version of a lullaby. A niece places a little cup on the north side for ancestors, not a drama, just etiquette, and you notice how everyone steps wide around it without looking. Quirky tidbit sneaks in. A set of sheep, ankle bones, shag eye, rests in a small bag by the doorway. Some mornings, someone spills 4 onto the rug and pretends fate is assigning who fetches water. The bones show horse, sheep, camel, goat. The laugh shows you, and somehow you're already reaching for the bucket. You keep the threshold sacred without sermon. Feet don't step on it. Bowls don't sit on it. Luck comes and goes through it and dislikes being elbowed. The rule has made your balance better than any gym routine. No tripping, no banging. You pass cups clockwise because counterclockwise feels like rowing against nice weather. The kettle dragon approves with a steam breath that fogs your wrist. Light joke 2. You award yourself a certificate in Traffic Flow Engineering, Jir Edition, printed on invisible paper. The older hands coach younger ones without commentary. A wrist is turned a 1/4 inch to keep a needle from chewing felt. A knot is retied with 1 extra wrap because wind collects hobbies. There's no scoreboard, only competence that spreads like warm tea. Mainstream note: children on this grass learn to ride startlingly early, some perched in front of adults by 3 or 4, many trotting small horses on their own by 5 or 6, and that early seat becomes the spine of everything else. When a small figure zips past the door, chasing a scarf that tried to escape, nobody flinches. You just remind them to mind the south wind in the guest bowl. Fairness here is measured in quiet corrections rather than speeches. If your hands are empty, someone will hand you something that wants carrying. If your mouth is idle, it becomes useful for blowing across a child's too hot tea. If you show off, you get a look that folds you down to usable size. The schedule is elastic but never sloppy. Repairs that can happen now happen now. Repairs that need sun or calm are named and parked. The saddle rack becomes the household's Kanban board, and the dog adds their approval stamp with a sneeze. A lull arrives the way a bird lands sideways. Then sure, you finish stitching a strap and feel how the awl's handle fits your palm like a continuation of breakfast. Someone sets boortsog aside for a neighbor who will happen to pass by, because neighbors happen like weather. You top the tea with a whisper of hot water and ask the airag bag whether it is ready for evening. It burbles like it has gossip and will share later. Light joke 3. You consider adding airag sommelier to your resume, notes of meadow, hints of saddle, finish of don't gallop afterward. Work wanders outdoors and back in, never quite closing a door behind it. A jacket is patched on the threshold to borrow good light. A girth is softened with warm water and persuasion at the stove's edge. A child's hat is retied because the knot learned curiosity. The rhythm feels like breath. In with chores that like warmth. Out with chores that like sky. No one declares a meeting. The meeting has been happening for 1,000 years and always adjourns on time. You learn to read generosity that hides in logistics. The best bowl goes to a guest you can't see yet. The softer aaruul pebbles are saved for the rider with yesterday's miles in their knees. The last sip of tea in the pot is poured off and cooled, deliberately planted as a future kindness for the person who will come in hot at precisely the wrong time. Historians still argue whether such domestic codes were written, sung, or simply absorbed. The answer, you suspect, is yes. By the time saddlebags lift, the house has exhaled into readiness. The hearth is banked like a promise. The east side glows with quiet order cups nested, cloths wrung and hung, horsehair loop shining with mysterious pride. The west side bristles with competence, saddles buckled, straps coiled, knives asleep in their sheaths. The north has its small, steady dignity, a bowl, a figurine, a memory. You step lightly around the threshold, shoulder the work you packed in Section 7, and feel how this dawn made riders without announcing it. Fairness measured in gestures, hospitality stored in pockets, patience cooked over dung into something that tastes like speed later. Your gloves, famously uninterested in warming themselves, sit exactly where you left them. You slide them on anyway, because some allies are symbolic and that's enough. The dog issues one last memo in the form of a huff. You answer by scratching the spot that turns them into silence. Then you take the reins that have been leaning against the saddle like they knew this moment, and the gur breathes you out as gently as it took you, in each person pivoting an inch so you pass, each task keeping pace so the whole day doesn't stumble. You don't say goodbye, you say back soon with your gait. You hear hoof snow and a polite cough at the edge of hearing the sound neighbors make when they want to be seen by people and not by dogs. The project manager, the dog, lifts an eyebrow. You answer with the standard phrase that is more spell than sentence. Hold your dog. The old greeting that says, I am friend and I am entering. The door latch clicks. You make the threshold wide with your posture, and remember the rule that has carried you since Section 1. You don't step on the threshold. You glide over it as if luck were sleeping there. Guests step in and vanish winter from their shoulders with a small shrug. You already have the ladle in your hand. First bowl goes to the newcomer, no debate, no announcements. Suutei tsai pours like a welcome that doesn't need adjectives. You flick the 3 white drops to the toono as you did earlier. A little upstream blessing so conversation will run smooth. Mainstream fact to keep handy. A guest is offered tea immediately in many Mongol homes, before names or news, and refusing outright is considered unkind. At least a sip is expected. Your guest cups the bowl with 2 hands, the way anyone holds warmth when the wind has been practicing its scales. They swallow, breathe, and the room's temperature changes by a tiny, important degree. Gifts are tiny weather systems. You slide over a boortsog and a kinder piece of aaruul, the grandmother's stash that avoids dentistry. And your neighbor produces the kind of present that fits a pocket and lasts a day. A sliver of brick tea wrapped in cloth, a wick of lamp cord, a twist of salt that knows it is always useful. You trade a packet of powdered borts, 1 soup, wherever water agrees to square the ledger nobody is keeping. Quirky tidbit. Some folks tuck an especially pretty aaruul pebble into a guest's hand when they leave. For the next ridge, as if it were a coin that buys patience. The currency inflates only in smiles. You place your visitor west of the hearth because saddles and men's gear live there. The honored spot, the north, opposite the door, stays calmly reserved for elders, ritual, and whoever is today's reason to be formal. Mainstream note. Inside many jars, the east side often keeps household goods and women's work. The west saddles and tools, and the north holds the family altar and honored seat. You don't lecture about it. You arrange bodies so the room can remember its manners without thinking. Bowls refill before sentences do. Your guest has news folded into their coat. You can hear it in the way they blow across the surface of tea. Short puffs mean small errands, long puffs mean miles. They speak in comfortable paragraphs. Wolves left prints but no trouble. Someone's foal wears new legs and arrogance. The western stream is a hinge of ice that opens at noon. You answer with your own essays. Borts, stocks are healthy. The kettle dragon has behaved. The airag bag is in a generous mood. Humor is traded like matches. Light joke 1. You offer the gossip that your gloves continue their career in high office minister of not warming themselves. The snuff bottle arrives without fanfare. A stone oval fat with history curug passed like a handshake that learned perfume. You take it with your right hand while your left touches your elbow, a sign of respect learned as easily as breathing. You do not inhale like a furnace. You sniff like a person who understands that cedar, amber, and horses can coexist. You return it with the same hand, lid aligned the way a road aligns with a bridge. Historians still argue whether the famous exchange rituals, snuff bottles, scarves, bows were uniform across clans in the 13th century, or whether later sources smooth a messier picture. Your morning proves that ritual lives by being both precise and forgiving. The airag bag gets its public purr now. Your guest shakes it as they sit, because hospitality is participatory, and the leather throat chuckles. A small bowl goes around, nothing dramatic. Just a sparkle that reminds the tongue that life includes bubbles. Mainstream fact. Airag usually sits low in alcohol, sparkling more than staggering, and shows up at greetings, farewells, negotiations, and the simple, not yet goodbye of mid-morning. You drink enough to agree with the day, but not enough to make the horse feel judged. Light joke 2. You toast to reasonable ambitions and cooperative weather, the two deities most likely to answer texts. The talk slides into barter the way tea slides into milk. Your neighbor needs a thong replated and a stirrup leather softened. You need the rumor confirmed about a trader carrying dye bricks and needles. You produce a small bone awl. They produce stronger sinew. The exchange counts as conversation. While your hands work, you top their bowl again without pausing the sentence. Hospitality here means nobody has to choose between finishing a thought and finishing a drink. When the awl passes back, it carries not just a fix but shared timing. Outside, their horse rests at the surge, the carved hitching post that turns a temporary visit into a tidy scene. You toss a corner of hay, and a nod horses read both. You ask, as etiquette rather than nosiness, whether the rider wants grain or another tie. They answer with wins a kitten, which means no, which means your hands stay in here and keep the ladle honest. Inside, the dog demotes itself from project manager to pillow. Convinced the situation is under control, you remember to offer meat. A few strands of borts slip into the little pot. Water follows, and heat edits stubbornness into broth. Your visitor accepts a bowl with the quiet gratitude of someone whose miles sit in their knees. They rip boortsog with that careful authority that says they were taught to break, not bite, when company watches. You let salt pinch the surface until the flavor stands straight and the room smells like honesty and plans. Etiquette here is a net you can lean on without seeing the knots. You never point with a full ladle. You don't pass a bowl over the hearth. You keep knives lying with handles toward the receiver so hands don't cross like quarrels. You praise horses before you ask favors. You taste first from your own pot before you serve guests. You don't compare summers like trophies. The effect is sleepy kindness more than rulebook. You notice with a private smile how many of these little do's and don'ts you've learned by doing, not by reciting. Your guest pulls from their coat a narrow blue scarf kadag creases neat as respect. It isn't grand ceremony, just neighborly. I found this in a trader's pack and thought of your altar. You receive it with two hands and place it north with the small figures and the bowl that remembers ancestors. The room approves by becoming quieter than silence. In return, you tuck a few white foods into their bag, a piece of aaruul, a knob of arome wrapped against melting because whiteness is luck-flavored like breakfast. Debate enters gently, like a cloud deciding whether to be shade. Your neighbor claims an uncle read aloud from the yasa last winter, a law that said hospitality to travelers is not suggestion but spine. You stir the pot, shrug a smile, and say the historian's sentence that keeps friendships safe. Historians still argue whether the yasa was a fixed book or a living bundle of decrees passed along and reshaped. Either way, everyone remembers the parts that make mornings calmer. The The room, choosing not to become an archive, agrees. One last round, one last laugh. You tell the story of the horsehair loop rescuing tea from a surprise cinder. Your neighbor counters with the tale of a city guest who inhaled snuff like a bellow and had to be consoled with 6 boortsog and a sympathetic dog. Light joke 3. You solemnly declare the dog a licensed therapist. The dog accepts the promotion with a yawn. When parting arrives, it does so without hurry. You fill the traveler's skin from your kettle-salted tea kept honest and tuck into their palm a twist of borts labeled in your head, for the place where wind makes time longer. They stand, step carefully over the threshold, and tie one small knot in your rope that means, I was here, and I'm coming back with a story. You follow them to the surge, untie the horse with that half-bow people do when tack also deserves respect, and offer a palm to the muzzle newsprint smell, warm breath. They swing up, ride 3 paces, and turn for the tiny bow that covers everything. Thanks, luck, neighbor. You raise the ladle in salute, because here the ladle and the bow speak the same language. The hooves write smaller and smaller punctuation across the frost. You step back inside, where the airag bag hums and the kettle nods and the threshold holds the shape of courtesy for the next set of footsteps that will ask to be made warm. You start with the truth, the step repeats until it becomes a lullaby. Horses eat first, riders choose second. You carry a leather sack that whispers when you walk coarse salt, knocking around like useful hail and head for the salt ground. A flat patch you've used enough that hooves have signed it smooth. The herd drifts toward you at the speed of politeness. Ears tip forward, noses lengthen, and all at once you are extremely popular. You scatter the big crystals in a wide fan so no one has to crowd, then crumble a few into a bowl and splash in water until they dissolve into a brine. A foal noses the edge, unsure whether this new ocean is edible. You laugh under your breath and show the mare first. She licks, and the foal's skepticism retires gracefully. Mainstream fact to pocket. Mongol horses are famously self-feeding, tough little grass engines that paw snow to graze winter pasture, and they're kept going with minerals and the occasional handout rather than daily grain. That thrift is part of how armies rode far without hauling barns behind them. Salt is encouragement and insurance. It coaxes thirst so drinking keeps pace with miles, and it tucks a quiet spark into muscles that will ask for long, steady effort. You step back and let lips click the ground clean. While the herd salts, you begin the quiet survey that saves afternoons. Hooves first. A hoof pick can be a dedicated iron hook or a disciplined stick. Either way, you work heel to toe, freeing packed mud and the little ice marbles that try to turn feet into stilts. You check the frog with 2 fingers and an apology, making sure it's springy, not sore. A flat chip at the toe is a footnote, not a crisis. A wedged stone is a tiny scandal handled in private. Quirky tidbit. In crusty snow, a smear of tallow rubbed into the sole can discourage ice balls from gluing themselves in. It's the Steppe's minimalist winter shoe tech, more kitchen than blacksmith. You run hands down cannon bones, feel for heat, read tendons like Braille. Tails swish with editorial comments. Your gloves contribute nothing to warmth consistent with their brand, but they make you look responsible, so they can stay. Light joke 1. You offer them the role of Deputy Minister of Pedicures. They accept, still cold. Shoes? Mostly no. These hooves are pebbled iron by birthright. Historians still argue whether large-scale farriery followed the Mongol armies deep into Europe, or whether rawhide wrappings and local repairs carried most of the load. Sources disagree like cousins at a reunion. What your fingertips confirm is simple. Most of your string goes barefoot and sound, trimmed by terrain and time more than tools. You mark one gelding in your head for a later file with the awl his outer wall chips where the river stones got opinionated. Next, mouths and minds. You know these horses like paragraphs you've reread. There's the bay mare with a trot as smooth as a well-stirred tea, the dun gelding whose canter is a short song and whose dislike of goats is frankly unprofessional, the small chestnut who stores extra bravery in a body the size of a joke. You watch them lick, blink, breathe, and choose today's ambitions accordingly. If the plan is distance with a chance of detours, you want an easy ribcage and a mind that files under unmoved by wind. If the plan is errands with neighbors, take the horse that stands like furniture when people talk. If they're scouting, take quick feet and a head that points itself toward the smallest path as if maps were a snack. You feed the horses with water next, because the salt wrote thirst into their morning. The stream has skinned over. You test with the butt of your knife, crack a circle, and let the bowl sink. Ears flick, nostrils flare. One by one they fold their necks to drink, and the sound is the exact sound you wanted. Small gulps, no coughs, patience. It's almost rude how beautiful it is. Tack waits where you left it. Felt pads airing on a rope. Wooden saddles with high pommels and cantles, your little fortresses leaning like nap-ready furniture. You lift a pad, shake off the dream dust, and rub the girth where yesterday left a memory. A pinch of clean ash from the hearth, remember Section 6? Works as a dry rub on a warm, slightly damp spot. It's old countryside medicine, part chemistry, part superstition. Entirely practical. The bridle's rawhide rains flecks without creak after a pass near the stove last night. A wolf-tooth charm knocks the cheekpiece once quirky. Yes, but plenty of riders swear it's sweet. Talks speed and scares away mischief that eyes can't see. You choose your mount like choosing a sentence. Subject, verb, calm. Today needs a forward trot and a willingness not to argue with wind, so you drift to the bay mare with the tea-smooth rhythm. She lifts her head with a look that says, I already knew. You curry with a bundled grass brush, long strokes, a little dust cloud, a shine that owes half its sparkle to last summer. Mane you finger comb, tail you fork with patience, because knots light up temper faster than almost anything. Light joke too. You briefly consider writing a self-help book. Untangle your tail, untangle your day. The horse is not impressed. You put the idea back in the bag with the aaruul. Saddle on. You set the felt pad forward, smooth, then slide it back a hand's breadth so hairs lay the friendly way. The wooden tree perches where shoulders have freedom, and kidneys have cheerleaders. Girth comes snug, not courtroom tight. You mark the buckle hole you expect and then try one looser. Your thumb can slip beneath without filing a complaint. Stirrups you set a little short archery posture, always ready to stand. Mainstream fact. That high-arched saddle plus shorter leathers allow a standing seat for shooting and scanning ground. It saves backs yours and the horses over long hours and sudden choices. You test both leathers by standing gently, knees soft, and letting the mare decide whether balance passes. She blinks, yes. Bridle on, tongue checked. Bit accepted with the same resignation mankind uses for taxes. You adjust the browband so eyes keep their full opinion. You tuck a spare thong into the headstall because wind loves to invent needs. The rest of the string you hobble light and long. They'll follow when asked or microwave grass where they stand. You knot a simple lead so a remount can come like a polite satellite if the day requests a second voice. Now the rider choosing continues. Not which horse, but which horse first. You'll rotate mounts as the sun slices the sky. Not because you're lazy, but because your efficient heat, heart, and legs share the work across bodies like a chore chart that hates drama. Historians still argue whether the average cavalryman had 3, 4, or 5 remounts at hand in the 13th century, and whether that number flexed by unit, rank, and terrain. Chronicles boast, archaeology squints, and the truth probably lived in a range rather than a rule. Your range today is 2 on the hoof and 1 left fat at home, the right balance between ambition and hay. You test brakes and steering in the whisper pen. A few steps left, a few right, back 1, forward 3. The mare chews quietly, thinking over your requests like a teacher grading neat handwriting. You ask for a slow trot and feel the tea-smooth seat arrive under you, the kind that lets a bowl ride in your hand without sloshing literature onto your sleeve. A half-halt somewhere near your breath gets an answer you like. You dismount and tighten the girth 1 hole, because saddles shrink when horses remember they have lungs. Superstitions have their tiny votes. You check the sky for a hawk, good focus, and the ground for a beetle crossing, good patience, and tie a single blue thread at the reine's end so the wind knows your address. You don't step on the rein ever. That's a confidence tax no relationship deserves. You walk the mare to the salt ground for one last polite lick, She pretends not to want it, and then has it anyway. You approve this honesty. A neighbor's stallion calls the world handsome. Your gelding pretends to be above it and still grows a neck. You angle your bodies like shields for one another until the choir settles. You've matched today's ambitions to horses that won't argue and arranged the herd, so nobody has to be brave alone. The dog, demoted from project manager to mounted escort, trots a ceremonial loop and then decides the sunbeam by the jeer is an underappreciated strategic asset. You mount from the left because that's what your body knows. You could switch if asked, but muscle memory is already pouring tea toward the horizon. You keep your seat light and your hand quiet. The mare looks once back at the jur where the kettle dragon keeps its slow promise and the airag bag purrs like an evening song not yet sung. Then she lifts into motion that feels like you invented smooth. Light joke 3 before you go. You consider naming the herd's social network, linked nay. The mare gives you a side eye that says, please be serious. You agree, immediately more serious. You touch the salt pouch at your belt, the aaruul stones in your pocket, the horsehair loop coiled in the cup, the small twists of borts in the bag. Everything you chose for yourself you've chosen for the horses too. Steady fuel, clear asks, room to breathe. You ride a slow arc around the herd to check that halters are tied to ideas, not accidents. Hobbles lie loose enough to walk, tight enough to discourage poetic journeys. A spare mount flicks an ear to let you know they're available. You raise 2 fingers to the household door, promise to come back, then point your mare's ears at the wider grammar of the steppe. Breakfast lingered long enough to train the day. Now the day, well-fed and well-salted, will train the miles. Miles settle into your joints like agreeable furniture, and the horizon finally admits a shape that isn't sky pretending to be land. A low line of felt and timber, a hitching post carved like a story, a roof that knows wind by its first name. This is an örtöö, a relay station, one vertebra in the empire's long spine. You lower your trot to a sentence with commas, let the mare blow softly, and approach with the same etiquette you use at a household door. Reins short, shoulders easy, eyes kind. You don't step on thresholds. You don't make noise bigger than your need. A man whose coat has known every weather emerges, palm lifted in the greeting that is half blessing, half inventory. You answer with the phrase that smooths dogs and days, hold your dog, and show the small tablet at your sash, your paisa, permission carved into metal and authority into wood. Mainstream fact. The Mongol postal system, the yam or örtöö, ran on stations like this, spaced a ride apart across plains and passes, with remounts and provisions kept by appointed families so messages could move as if the wind had errands. Your paisa is less a brag than a promise. You will use lightly what others must maintain. You hitch at the surge and dismount into a smell you already trust. Felt warming, argal behaving, milk deciding to be tea. Inside, the station's hearth is a cousin of your own iron, patient and convinced that every conversation should start with heat. Bowls arrive without ceremony. Suutei tastes of this district's decisions. Salt a whisper stronger than home, butter a shade more meadow, smoke with a different grammar. You take a sip and feel the day glide forward a finger's width. Road food here is not new, only neighborly. Aaruul from this valley is paler, cut in thinner leaves that soften sooner against the tongue. Boortsog wears a different knot, fried in fat that remembers sheep more than cattle. A pot near the coals holds borts broth kept on a low, faithful simmer for whoever arrives, civilized enough to be tired. You add a pinch of your own powdered borts, egoless collaboration, and watch the surface gather strength. Quirky tidbit. Old station. Keepers sometimes claim they can taste which direction a rider came from by the tea alone. More salt from dry basins. More smoke near larch stands, part folklore. Part palate trained by weather. You talk by chores. Your mare's girth gets eased a hole. Her shoulders get a rub where the hair lies flatter than it used to. Someone brings a rope bucket. You crack the skin at the well and the water says winter but drinkable. The station keeper's child counts your boortsog for safety and returns one extra with the diplomacy of an emperor. Your gloves continue their civil service career of not warming themselves and get promoted on the spot to deputy minister of remount paperwork. Light joke 1. If a certain modern website existed, you'd leave a review. 5 yaks, tea foamy, wind cooperative, would relay again. Maps are drawn in bowls here. You learn distance by flavor. The next station north is said to sweeten tea with a memory of goat. The one beyond keeps a stack of dried noodles, thin, square, forgiving that melt into broth like obedient ideas. This house prefers dumplings on days when clouds refuse to make up their minds. You watch a few pinch themselves into being not festival, big, just travel, honest. Historians still argue whether such noodle and dumpling comforts marked stations regularly in the 13th century or grew more common later as routes settled and trade thickened. The record mutters in ledgers and travelers' notes, and kitchens keep their own minutes. You produce the horsehair loop from your cup as if it were an honored guest. The station keeper smiles the smile of someone who's fished cinders from bowls since forever. Ash Mischief is denied entry. A second ladle of broth arrives, now with 2 dumplings that float like persuadable moons. You tear a quiet piece of boortsog and drag it once through the surface, because you are not made of iron. Outside, a pair of remounts blink in the curious way of horses who know their jobs better than yours. Their manes are combed with a willow fork, their hooves trimmed by ground and not by drama. The paisa earns its keep without swagger. You present it where custom expects, not waved, not hidden. It does not mean free, it means trusted to repay. In return, you offer a twist of your own borts, a strip of rawhide for tying, a thick needle from your kit, if theirs broke last week. The network runs on taxes and appointments, yes, but also on the soft economy of favors that can ride in a pocket. Mainstream note: Ogade and his successors formalized this relay web, setting obligations on communities to keep stations stocked with mounts and fodder, a system that impressed and irritated foreign envoys in equal measure. You sip and decide, impressed tastes better than irritated. A messenger arrives, ice on his mustache like quiet metals. He gets the first remount by right of speed. You watch the change like a dance learned in childhood. One saddle off, one on, girth snug, a swallow of tea, a wedge of curd, a nod, gone. The horse he leaves behind steams like a polite kettle. You step out to lead it, walk it until breath becomes sentences again, and throw a cloth over the back so muscles feel seen. Light joke 2. You consider launching a premium service called Yam Prime Guaranteed Remounts. 2-day shipping on gossip. The station keeper refuses to invest. You respect their portfolio. Inside, a leather ledger rests near the door, edges shiny from years of thumbs. Some stations scratch, mark simple notches for riders passing. Tiny tamga signs for clans responsible. Others keep counts with pebbles in a dish. Historians still argue whether a uniform record-keeping protocol existed empire-wide, or whether every bone in this postal spine carried its own local cartilage of habits. Fragments survive, opinions multiply, and the wind clears its throat. You add your name with a sign that means your camp, your miles, and a promise to return a favor you haven't met yet. The station meal concludes like a sentence with a long, contented period. A last sip of salted tea. A last bite of dumpling that remembers broth fondly. You rinse your bowl with a swallow of hot water and offer the rinse to the dog, who accepts with managerial gravity. You loosen your mare's girth again, just a hole for courtesy, then tighten once before mounting. Because saddles tell small lies when they're happy. You check your straps, your pouches, the stubborn gloves, the salt. The station keeper's child brings you a pebble of aaruul for the next ridge. As if miles were a mouth you could keep occupied. You accept the gift with both hands. Outside, the post road isn't a road. It's a sentence the ground remembers. Station to station, comfort maps itself in repeating nouns. Tea, broth, rope, hay, remount. Between them, you live on your pocket breakfasts and your rules from earlier, small. Often, before you want. You mount. Thank the house with a bow of head and heart, and leave only steam and a friendly knot in the hitching rope as proof you were real. Light joke 3. You promise your gloves a performance review at the next station. They remain unruffled, which is, admittedly, their superpower. The day lengthens into a string of vertebrae. Each örtöö gives you a new flavor of the same sentence, a new face holding the same ladle. One offers a pinch of dried wild onion, another, a heel of bread that learned to travel, a third, a snuff bottle with winter trapped politely inside. The empire's speed stops being a number and becomes a taste, a rhythm you can drink from a wooden bowl. You ride within that rhythm like a note inside a song, and find yourself mapped gently, usefully onto a system built from horses and promises. When the next low line of felt appears on the lip of the earth, you already know how the tea will introduce itself, and how your hand will answer. You pause at the edge of doing, and remember the part that makes doing go smoothly. The little courtesies you pay to wind, water, fire, and whoever's listening above the toono. Your ladle lifts not just for thirst, but for manners. 3 white drops arc toward the smoke hole, milk. Luck. Milk so the sky knows it hasn't been forgotten while breakfast kept you busy. The droplets vanish with a soft hiss like a secret being agreed upon, and the room feels an inch more reasonable. You don't clap, you breathe. White foods carry gravity here, not drama milk, cream, curds, but are things that calm a table and persuade a day. Mainstream fact to keep in your pocket. In Mongol custom, offerings of white, zagan, foods, especially milk or milk tea, are common gestures to honor spirits, guests, and thresholds, and the first sips or drops often go to sky or hearth before anyone else. You flick again, not because counting matters, but because rhythm does, then set the bowl near the north where memory lives. The dog watches with the solemnity of a mid-level priest. You cave and scratch the holy spot behind its ear. The hearth has its own list of politenesses. You don't step over it. You walk around the way you walk around a sleeping friend who will forgive but shouldn't have to. You don't toss trash into flame. That's how quarrels start. You don't spit, even if smoke flirts rudely with your throat. A twist of the toono is better litigation than saliva. The kettle dragon from earlier appreciates these rules. It hums approval instead of sulking and boiling over. You add a coin of argal as if placing a blanket, edge aligned, future warmth guaranteed. Light joke 1. You consider drafting the Hearth Employee Handbook, Chapter 1, No Drama, Chapter 2, Don't Be Ash. You wander out to the ovoo on the nearby rise, when the light turns polite. Stones stacked by hands that didn't need to sign their names. Branches with blue scarves moving like patient rivers, arag, that whisper blessings at a wind's reading speed. You circle clockwise because your feet would rebel otherwise. A sip from your bowl becomes a spray of white across the stones, and a crumb of boortsog joins it travel food offered to travel spirits. Historians still argue whether the ovoo rites you see today circumambulations, scarf offerings, milk, libations, mirror 13th century practice, or gather later layers of Buddhism poured over much older sky and mountain reverence. The debate is scholarly. The feeling in your chest is simple. Be courteous to large things. On your way back, you pass the well and consider water manners. A drop of milk to the lip when the first bucket comes up, to keep the water kinder than thirst. No washing tack where horses drink. No loose straps dangling into a place that learned patience one winter at a time. You place a butter smear on the bucket's rim for luck and maybe lubrication of conversations you haven't had yet. Quirky tidbit. Some herders swear a thread of blue yarn tied to a bucket handle keeps the well spirit attentive and the rope from fraying. You tie one, partly for superstition, partly because blue looks excellent doing its job. Back in the gur, you keep greetings shaped correctly. You offer tea with both hands, right hand leading, left touching your elbow, a small choreography that makes the bowl heavier in the best way. If a snuff bottle appears, you turn the cap neutrally and sniff like a person who respects both nose and stone, then return it cap aligned. A misaligned cap is above mild rudeness and just below invitation to a long story about manners. Your horsehair loop remember the absurdly competent filter from earlier lounges beside the cups. The silent bouncer that keeps ash from crashing the ritual. Nothing sacred forbids a smile. The child who counts boortsog for safety gets the softest piece on purpose. A scarf found in a trader's pack becomes a kadag as soon as grateful hands tie it to the north space. Intention promotes fabric, not the shop. The ancestor shelf receives a tiny dab of urim on a spoon because past people also liked cream. You're just maintaining continuity. Light joke 2. You whisper to the shelf, "We're out of crocodile, dung sunscreen, but we do have butter." Then decide some jokes are best reported to no one but the dog, who approves. Taboos keep warmth inside the day. You don't sit with your back to the north in an honored house. You don't point boots toward the altar. You never step on the threshold, that thin ambassador between inside and everything else. Knives point with handles. Bowls travel by hand, not by throw. Reins lie on the floor like sleeping snakes whose tails you never step on. If someone older reaches for work you can do, you beat them to it gently, which is how respect moves faster than language. You sprinkle milk in 3 other directions before noon east to encourage sunrise on hard mornings. South to sweeten the door where strangers turn into guests. West to thank whatever the day is becoming. North you treat with a longer breath, because that's where faces you can't remember clearly still wait for bowls you won't forget to pour. Mainstream note to file. Blue, the color of the sky, khokhuur, carries good luck in Mongol symbolism. It's why scarf offerings, thread charms, and even painted bridles often lean blue, a visible conversation with the big ceiling. Taboos can be practical in disguise. Don't whistle in the jur. You might call wind harder than you bargained for. Don't shake a wool felt like you're mad at weather. The hearth will inhale your tantrum. Don't lean a saddle against the altar. Pride and pommels are famously incompatible. Don't brag about distance before you ride it. Wind can hear, and wind has opinions. Historians still argue whether such proverbs belong to a codified law of the steppe, or simply to long shared habits that everyone enforced with side-eye. Either way, the side-eye works. You keep a small bag of shagai sheep ankle bones by the door, bone dice and tiny oracles that click into horse, sheep, camel, goat when tossed. You spill 4 into your palm and let them fall onto a felt mat. Their faces say the day wants a horse's steadiness and a goat's curiosity. You nod like you completely understand. Then do what you were going to do anyway, just more politely. When a guest leaves, you slip 1 polished bone into their pocket, a pocket-sized itinerary for luck. Quirky addendum. If the bones land 4 horses, someone inevitably claims a race is fated and then pretends to lose with perfect sportsmanship. The dog snores through a blessing. You allow it. Your famously unhelpful gloves sit in the sacred north for 12 seconds like they belong to a saint. You remove them quickly, having flirted with sacrilege enough for 1 morning. Light joke 3. You ask the airag bag if it would like to be worshipped. It bubbles like a deity who accepts tasteful libations after sundown. At noon, a neighbor arrives with a story folded into a scarf. You greet them with, "Hold your dog," which holds no dogs but opens all kinds of doors. You pour the first bowl for them, the second for you, and a third, just a fingertip, for the hearth. Without anyone voting, the room agrees to talk about weather as if it were a cousin you love too much to criticize. You all keep your feet away from the threshold, and your words from unnecessary edges. The day tips toward afternoon and you find that offerings and taboos have added a soft lining to everything, saddling, eating, asking, leaving like fur sewn into a cuff where skin meets winter. A drop to the sky did not change the sun. It changed you, which is enough. A circle around stones did not move mountains. It placed your feet into a rhythm mountains can tolerate. Pouring first for the hearth didn't make the fire bigger. It made your hand steadier, which makes everything warmer. When you step out again, you do it the way you did in section 1 and in every section since over the threshold. Never on it, and the sky looks like a bowl that has remembered to be generous. The ovoo holds its scarves like a choir with time. The dog escorts you to the surge and resigns from priesthood to pursue a career in naps. You touch the salt pouch, the horsehair loop, the aaruul stones, the small twist of borts, and feel the quiet arithmetic of courtesy adding up to speed, safety, and the kind of luck that doesn't have to brag. Speed edits appetite the way wind edits plans. You feel it the moment orders turn the camp from round to arrow. You wake before the kettle believes in itself and accept the smallest kindnesses a morning will spare for a marching day. A thumb of suutei tsai, salted a hair more than usual. one obedient corner of boortsog, an aaruul pebble tucked under your tongue like a secret. You look at the pot that could become soup and choose to leave it a promise instead. Speed before soup. You will drink later from distance itself. The saddle speaks first. You slide the felt pad forward and back so hair lies with you, not against you. Girth has a wartime #1 hole tighter than leisure, and today it gets it. You lift each foreleg and let the elbow press the girth to find pinches. You would rather argue with plans than with skin. A pinch of clean hearth ash, remember the trick, from section 6 dusts the damp that wants to chafe. Your famously unhelpful gloves supervise, still refusing to get warm. You promote them to Deputy Minister of Morale stickers and promise them a performance review after the first ridge. Breakfast becomes choreography. A sip at the door, one breath to the toono, white drops for luck, quick and sincere. Then you coil the horsehair loop beside your cup in case Ash attempts drama at the last second. A twist of powdered bort slips into your belt pouch soup in waiting, and the salt pouch takes its rightful place at your sash. The aaruul under your tongue dissolves so slowly it may be auditing you. You step over the threshold not on it, and the sky answers with a color that means move. Mainstream fact to carry like a banner. Riders form in tens, hundreds, thousands, the decimal organization of Arbin, Joggin, Mingin, Tumen, so breakfast lines learn to become columns without anyone shouting their lungs out. You settle into your small number with easy shoulders, because calm moves faster than panic. Ahead, a standard stirs. Yak-tail tassels bristle from a pole, the kind of symbol that holds together men who disagree about jokes. Somewhere beyond your sightline, the Black War standard waits in its own careful place, the haft like a decision stuck into earth. Your bow and mind warm together. The composite bow hates damp and loves attention. You keep the string in your deal until the day earns it, and thumb ring sits where muscle memory meets manners. Wax on string, wax on cheeks where wind can burn. Your quiver gets the quiet count you do every time. Broadheads for serious sentences, lighter shafts for long punctuation. A whistle-tipped oddity that some riders swear is good for signaling and others say is just for making horses pretend to know music. Quirky tidbit, delivered with a grin. Someone always claims their uncle could call a friend across a valley with a whistling arrow. Someone else always claims the uncle was very optimistic. Orders travel like steam, no drama, all direction. You rotate mounts because legs are a currency you spend slowly. The bay mare takes first shift. The dun gelding keeps his morning in reserve. Straps are tied with knots you can undo in gloves because you will still be wearing these stubborn clouds at noon. Light joke 1. The gloves request a transfer to indoor candle maintenance. Application denied. Your tea skin rides high. Water skin low. Both stoppers shine with fat and experience. The airag bottle stays deep in the bag twilight business. Not a galloping companion. You eat what moves while you move. Boortsog becomes a morsel you can break with one hand and, when the trot allows, dunk into your salted tea like an edible metronome. Aaruul rotates from tongue to cheek, and back when hills ask for breath. The little twists of borts become stock whenever water goes honest. A cup dipped from a winter stream, warmed by a stone you've carried in your pocket as a portable ember. Historians still argue whether those famous tales of meat tenderized under the saddle, the so-called saddle steak, were actual practice or a long-lived outsider's joke. Either way, your breakfast prefers the kettle and a small fire you trust. The line stretches into a sentence the earth can read. Scouts scatter like commas. A signal flag tugs once, and the trot becomes a ground-eating canter that stays within the bounds of courtesy to hooves. You breathe in 4 counts, drink in sips, think in maps. The herd at your flank, remounts, pack animals, other people's patience, keeps a rhythm of smaller hooves and steady ears, and your horse believes in the ground, as if it were a promise you wrote together. You pass a station, an örtöö you tasted in section 11 and don't stop. The smell of broth is a poem you bookmark for later. Strategy edits breakfast in tiny, bossy ways. You skip fat when the pace will be quick for hours. You add salt when the wind insists on gossip. If the plan calls for feigned retreat, turn, stretch, invite, regroup, you don't overload your stomach, because drama loves a full belly with no sense of timing. If the plan calls for a long arc to the right, you plan your sips for the places where the ground remembers to be kind. The decimal liters rotate to check girths and eyes. A hand rides up the line with a tiny cloth. Wet the lips, pass it back, drink on the move, no speeches. You think of the nurge, the great circular hunts that behave like practice campaigns, teaching horse and rider to be a loop that tightens and tightens until orders appear to have been obeyed by the weather. Mainstream aside, sources describe those massive hunts doubling as musters and drills, sharpening discipline that later made units move like handwriting from one mind. You can feel that handwriting now. No one tells you not to race your neighbor. You simply don't, because the column is a fragile miracle you want to keep. Signals are simple on purpose. Banner lifts twice, shift left, horn low and long ease pace. A spear held high eyes forward on that ridge, not on fantasy. You share the road with silence and snuff bottles, the latter traveling hand to hand with lids properly aligned. Even at a walk, manners are still a weapon against chaos. When a courier streaks through like a bright thought, you make room the way you make room for tea, because information moves the army faster than oats. A pause arrives at a stream with a face you like. You slide down, let the mare drink to satisfaction, not exhaustion, and crack ice politely where it pretends to be a lid. The dog, who has demoted itself from project manager to mud critic, finds the only dry patch and guards it. You make broth in 30 seconds, borts, twist, salt, a finger of hot water poured over a warmed stone. The cup becomes courage with no theatrics. Light joke 2. You name this recipe 5-second soup, and consider selling it to impatient city people. The wind forms an investors' committee and laughs you out of the room. You check hooves again because stones have opinions, and lift the saddle to smooth hair that tried to write its own rumor under the pad. Girth goes back to the wartime hole. You give your spare mount a glance that says, "Next?" and your current one, a rub that says, "Soon." You wipe the bit with a wet thumb so the iron tastes like a considerate friend, not a punishment. If someone mentions a banner change ahead, you rearrange your pocket's boortsog closer, water easiest, salt loud. The debate that never dies flickers again as a traveling story at your elbow. Did the riders of your grandfathers really drink blood from their horses in emergencies, neat and practical as a sip of tea? Historians still argue whether that was routine, rare, or a tale that galloped too far on its own. Either way, this morning is not a crisis, and your courage comes white and salty, not red and dramatic. You stroke a neck and let the rumor keep riding without a saddle. Distance turns late, and appetite finally files a request you're ready to honor. You fold out of the saddle in a single quiet motion, put a coin of argal into a travel stove. Yes, even here, fuel behaves if you've behaved, and heat enough water for everyone within arm's length to feel less like a plan and more like people. The suutei tsai you brew is wartime thin, more water than milk, but it lands where it should. Shoulders drop, voices remember the joke they were building, and even your gloves pretend to feel a degree warmer. Light joke 3. You award them a medal for valiant endurance in the face of adequate tea. When you ride on, you ride lighter for having kept breakfast small and frequent, not grand and rare. Speed before soup did not cancel comfort. It spread it across the miles until comfort learned to canter. You leave behind a wet circle on a stone, a handful of ashes that will tomorrow polish a pot, and the memory of a cup that knew its job. Orders move again. The column gathers itself. The standard leans. And your hunger, tamed into a quiet partner, nods at the terrain and agrees to think in sips a little longer. Seasons write menus in grass and breath, and you read them with your hands before your tongue. Summer makes the airag bag a metronome, purring every time the door opens. Winter rewrites suutei tsai as central heating in a bowl. Spring promises extravagance and then sends you shopping in the pantry. Autumn teaches storage like a kindly drill sergeant. You don't argue. You adjust the ladle and the saddle at the same time, because breakfast must ride. Summer first, loud with bees and saddle jingles. Mares are in milk, foals practicing legs and entitlement, and your morning's braid milking with motion. You tether the foal, draw the sweet, bright streams. and pour the silver into the leather throat that remembers every June since memory learned to ferment. Mainstream fact to pocket. Airag is largely a warm season drink. Mare's lactation peaks in late spring and summer, so households churn and shake through the long light, sharing bowls that sparkle more than they stagger. Tea lightens in summer too. Less butter, a cautious pinch of salt, sometimes a finish of clotted cream arome so thin it feels like a rumor. You keep breakfasts quick because heat is a trickster. Rides begin early, and thirst demands diplomacy rather than dessert. Boortsog shrinks to travel size. Aaruul pebbles do most of the talking between sips. Light joke 1. You nickname airag carbonated yoga and tell your neighbor it improves flexibility. Your neighbor says only your jokes got looser. Late summer stretches into that ripening hush where grass browns at the tips and shadows get honest. You dry, you render, you plan. Aaruul trays line the sunny side of the gur. Stones of sour bright patience that your winter jaw will praise and curse in equal measure. Borts multiplies by subtraction. Meat sliced thinner than an excuse, hung high where wind edits and flies give up. Fats melt into jars, tallow that will make winter tea shine and keep leather agreeable. Quirky tidbit. You thread curd beads on string for children edible necklaces that soften from breath and time both snack and shushing spell during long trots. The kettle dragon watches all this industry with a smug curl of steam, as if it invented autumn. Autumn itself is your favorite quartermaster. You stack argal in shoulder-high walls, coins of last season's grass banked against the months that forget generosity. You bargain for flour or millet with a twist of borts and a promise of news. Some houses will pinch little dumplings banched to freeze like white commas on boards outside, ready to drop into broth when wind tries to file a complaint through your bones. Historians still argue whether imported grains like millet and wheat became winter breakfast regulars for ordinary herders during the empire's peak, or remained luxuries tied to trade posts and elite camps. The archaeological crumbs and traveler notes don't agree. And your bowl, today, holds both possibilities. A few noodles if the trader's pack was kind, plain stock if distance gets the last word. Either way, you sip warmth and count your dry stacks with your eyes. Winter arrives on felt feet and iron breath. The gur turns from circle to fortress. The toono opens only enough for smoke to be polite. The dog resigns from project management to pursue a PhD in naps by the stove. Breakfast leans heavy and honest suutei, tsai salted braver, butter generous enough to leave a moon on your lip, borts broth that tastes like a straight sentence. You warm aaruul over the stove's shoulder, so teeth don't write angry poetry. You melt snow in the gourd and bless it with a pinch of salt so thirst doesn't ambush you later. Mainstream aside, worth keeping. Many families move between seasonal camps uvulju, wintering sites, offering shelter from wind, zunja, summer pastures, promising grass and water so your breakfast table literally migrates, the stove following hooves. Light joke 2. You call winter tea radiator soup and promise your famously unhelpful gloves a promotion if they ever learn what warm means. They stage a peaceful protest at your wrists. Lean weeks test your choreography. Deep cold shortens patience but rewards sequence. Argal coin, small boil, quick stock, sip, breathe, check hooves for ice pearls. Repeat. When the river skins over with glass, you crack and pour with the respect you owe a mirror. A trick you inherited surfaces. Tuck a warmed pebble into the cup so broth stays above sulk. A second pebble in the glove keeps fingers willing to be part of your body. You don't brag about miles before you ride them. Winter hears everything. Spring returns like an apology with flowers. Pasture wakes in small, edible whispers. First shoots taste like green punctuation. Foals arrive, which means milk belongs to them for a while. Your airag bag must practice patience until hooves grow confident. Breakfast turns into archaeology. Jars from the back of the chest, curls of tallow, last trays of aaruul that have survived dry and stubborn. You thin broth without tragedy and sweeten tea with conversation instead of butter. Then the miracle that pastoral families everywhere recognize. The first heavy milk after calving, rich, custardy, concentrated, set into a wobbling treat that tastes like a holiday invented by the udder. Quirky tidbit. Those first bee stings custards have their own nicknames and rules in many camps. Some say you share with the youngest first so luck doesn't hoard. Others insist the oldest gets the first spoon so memory can remind spring how to behave. Grass lengthens, so do your mornings. You retrain hands that got used to leather and thaw to the old milking rhythm. The airag bag wakes grumpy, then cheerful, then indispensable. Dumplings shrink again to travel size. Dumpling water becomes soup. You test your salt pouch for endurance and discover it is a bottomless optimist. Historians still argue whether these seasonal food cycles were as standardized across the 13th century steppe as some later ethnographers imply, or whether microecologies, river basins, high plains, forest margins gave each camp its own breakfast dialect. The debate rides on, but your ladle already speaks both consensus and accent. Fuel, too, speaks season. In summer, you coke small, quick flames that don't argue with heat. In winter, you build patient beds that hug iron and keep tea from sulking. Autumn asks you to think like a mason argal stacked by dryness, not by enthusiasm, so December won't improvise. Spring lets you burn the crumbly leftovers you scolded in August. You forgive them because forgiveness warms hands. The ash paste that scrubs pots in every season changes texture with what the herd ate herb sweet in late spring, brisk and sandy after wind-blown months. You become an ash sommelier without telling anyone. Festivals float through this calendar like islands of extra dairy. At Lunar New Year, Zagan Sar, white foods climb into towers, boortsog building scaffoldings of welcome. Morning tea turns ceremonial, first drops to the sky, first bowls to elders, first jokes to the dog because the dog grades humor generously. Then ordinary returns, which is what you wanted all along. A bowl, a breath, a horse chewing in a rhythm that makes your spine remember music. Travel doesn't stop for weather. Travel just changes breakfast's tempo. In summer, you plan sips by shade. In winter, you schedule them by the kinds of snow: crisp, squeak, lyre. Autumn pack lists are lectures on foresight. Spring ones are scavenger hunts with excellent prizes. You tie a blue thread on the water bucket because you like the way hope looks when it's practical. You move the horsehair loop closer to the cups when wind grows opinionated. Ash loves drama year-round, but it auditions more in March. Through all of it, manners keep their seasonless edge. Thresholds are still not for feet. Bowls still travel by two hands. You still flick white drops to the toono before you pour for yourself. You still thank the stove elder with a well-placed coin of fuel. Your famously unhelpful gloves remain a running gag and a reliable pair of hands. You keep them for their moral fiber. Light joke 3. You consider rebranding seasonal menu shifts as a nomad tasting menu, 4 courses. Melt, cure, courage, hope. The dog approves the tagline and goes back to research. By day's end, you realize the menu never really changed. It modulated. Summer dairies teach speed without rush. Autumn stores teach patience without delay. Winter fats teach warmth without flame. Throwers. Spring scarcity teaches gratitude without speeches. You taste the year the way you read a good trail, not as 4 separate paths, but as one road-changing voice. Your cup lifts in each season to the same sky, and the same 3 drops rise before any sip, because luck, like breakfast, likes a schedule. The horse nods, the kettle hums, the grass writes another chapter, and you seasoned by seasons drink the sentence to its calm period. Evening leans against the gur like a friend who knows when to be quiet, and you do the same. The kettle dragon settles from a working hum to a cat's purr. The argal bed glows the color of patient coals. The dog, retired yet again from project management, curls into a comma where drafts forget to travel. You lift the ladle for one last small kindness, suutei tie thin and warm and flick 3 white drops up through the toono so the sky doesn't feel left out of the review meeting. Then you sit where the floor knows your weight, hands wrapped around the bowl that trained your whole day to be kind. Your aftertaste is a ledger of tiny choices. Water first, then milk. Mare first, then foal. Horses eat before riders, salt before miles, patience before speed, speed before soup only when orders insisted. Your famously unhelpful gloves rest by the door like two small officials who signed no papers yet attended every negotiation. You give them a last promotion, undersecretaries of not quite warm, and they accept with their usual admirable lack of warmth. The horsehair loop, today's ash bouncer, gleams with the smug pride of a tool that has rescued bowls from drama all day. You coil it where tomorrow's hands will find it without thinking. Outside, hooves thud once and then become grass again. The herd understands camp the way steam understands lids. You step out, mind the threshold over, never on and listen to the steppe rehearse its night vocabulary. Somewhere a fox edits a silence. Somewhere a crane folds its wings into a closed parenthesis. You tilt your face and find the golden peg Alton Hadas, Polaris nailed into the black with the confidence of a craftsman who overbuilds. Mainstream fact to keep. Herders across Inner Asia, Mongols among them, have long used Polaris as a steady north, a sky peg for orientation that doesn't wander while seasons do. You point your breath at it and let your shoulders remember where they belong. Wind is a critic you've learned to appreciate. It sniffs the felt walls, finds no quarrel, and wanders off to great hills. The ovoo on the rise wears its blue scarves like slow rivers. The knots you tied this morning hold. You circle once, clockwise, the way your feet insist, and place a crumb of boortsog at the base for the night watchers no ledger mentions. Quirky tidbit, local and lovable. Some folks claim that if you count the roof poles the uni backward from the door to the altar, you can fall asleep faster. You try 5, forget the number, and call the experiment a success. Back inside, coals glow like a map of red islands. You spread them with a stick so heat lies even through the long paragraph of night. The kettle's lid rattles once as if clearing its throat before a lullaby. You pour a tiny bowl for the hearth elder, because habit is the best guard. Then you sip your own and let it be more salt than milk, more breath than story. The dog opens one eye to confirm your competence, then returns to research. On the wall, a small bag of aaruul, today's stubborn counselor, rests with the good temper of a tool that knows it will be useful tomorrow. Your mind inventories horses the way hands inventory tack. The bay mare with tea-smooth trot carried first watch. The dun with the short song canter will open tomorrow. A spare mount kept its humor when the station child counted your boortsog for safety. Tendons cool, hooves dry. You walked each one in a circle of sentences until breath became prose again. Historians still argue whether night pickets in ordinary camps were formal rosters at every scale, or rotating habits enforced by seasoned eyes and well-trained dogs. Chronicles praise generals, elders praise routines. You choose routines. A dog's soft alarm, a human ear that knows the difference between wind and intention, a remount kept ready because luck likes backup plans. The paisa sleeps in your sash, a polite wait that means neighbors will pour for you at distant doors because you poured for them here. You think of the relay keepers at the örtöö, how the day tasted different at each station but always said the same sentence, welcome, eat, ride. You think of the bow that stayed dry under your deal, the string waxed and uncomplaining. The whistle-tipped arrow you still suspect is there mostly to keep jokes in circulation. You think of the ash paste that learned to be soap, and your hands, which learned to be consistent. Your last chores shrink to a single, careful picture. You bank the fire low, lay tomorrow's first argal coin exactly where sleepy fingers will thank you. You hang the airag bag just high enough that no one will bump it in the dark. It answers with that contented, linen, throated murmur that promises evening sparkle when the sky forgets blue tomorrow. You set a cup with 2 sips of cool tea near the door for future you, coming in too warm and too quick from a night check. You move the ladle half an inch to the left because good habits get better with small, ridiculous precisions. The snuff bottle makes one last round with the gravity of a pebble from a lucky stream. You uncap, inhale cedar amber winter like a memory you haven't had yet, and pass it back aligned, always aligned. The shagai bones click once in your palm and land as horse, goat, camel, which you translate as sleep well, wake curious, don't borrow, worry. The The dog approves the forecast. Your gloves file no objection. You stretch where rugs, remember your feet, and lie down close enough to the hearth that breath and coal can negotiate on friendly terms. Felt settles over your shoulder with that weight that forgives everything. Through the toono, a star winks a slow pulse. Smoke threads out in such a thin line it reads like handwriting. Your ears, newly fluent, categorize night sounds. A horse stomps at a dream. A rope sighs. The stove ticks. The wind prints its calm onto the side of the jar. Your stomach, tutored by small bites and salted warmth, files a final report titled All is Well. Before your eyelids sign the day's last treaty, you review the constants gently, like counting foals at dusk. Begin with water. Honor the threshold. Feed horses first. Salt is kindness. Tea is diplomacy. Airag is evening. Aaruul is patience. Boortsog is morale. Borts is insurance. Argal is memory. The horsehair loop saves dignity. The dog is wiser than its resume. The gloves will never warm, and that's fine. The steppe prefers competence over drama and rewards jokes told softly. You let that last thought linger until it turns to steam and the kettle dragon, proud and drowsy, keeps watch for both of you. The coals dim to a velvet red, and you drift with them. Slower now, softer now, as if your thoughts have traded hooves for wool. The felt wall breathes with you, a gentle in and out that makes the whole room feel like a giant sleeve you can climb into and sleep inside. Your bowl is empty, warm against your palms, and the warmth seeps into your fingers, then your wrists, then your forearms, smoothing the little knots that daylight tied. Outside, the horses settle, each one folding the night beneath its belly, and their slow, contented breaths rise like quiet hills, one after another, until the landscape of sound is only ease. You think of the small rituals that lined the day, the first sip of water, the bright ribbon of milk, the steady hand on a girth, the white drops to the sky, and they stack in your memory like flat, safe stones across a stream. Easy to cross, impossible to hurry. The wind has gentled to a hush that sounds like a faraway river talking in its sleep. The dog, somewhere near your feet, shifts once and becomes still, and that stillness is permission. Let your breath lengthen. Let your shoulders grow heavy and sure. If thoughts try to gallop, feed them a pebble of aaruul and watch them slow to a curious chew. If worries whisper, pour them a small bowl of salted tea and see how they forget what they were saying. Above you, the golden peg holds the sky in place. Beneath you, the rugs remember where your steps have been and promise to keep the rest of the way soft. The kettle keeps a faithful, far-off murmur, and it becomes the sound of a stream under thin ice, then the sound of wind in summer grass, then the sound of nothing you need to name. Eyes close the way, doors close in good houses, gently, on well-oiled hinges. Sleep comes like a horse that knows your hand, no rush, no startle, only trust, and the long, even road of rest stretching out ahead.